Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Dalia Dippolito. On a warm afternoon in Palm Beach, Florida, a man named Mohammed came to the police station to Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Dalia Dippolito. On a warm afternoon in Palm Beach, Florida, a man named Mohammed came to the police station to report a disturbing incident. He said that a woman named Dalia had approached him and offered to hire him to kill someone. Although Mohammed did not provide Dalia's last name, the Palm Beach police considered the information credible and began an investigation. They had to establish Dalia's full identity and find the husband she wanted to kill. With this limited information, detectives began an investigation to clarify the case and prevent a possible murder. To gather more information, the detectives decided to use the witness Mohammed to arrange a meeting with Dalia. They chose the mobile gas station as the meeting location because, according to Mohammed, Dalia lived nearby. At the gas station, the detectives arranged several cars to monitor the meeting. Before Dalia arrived, they instructed Mohammed on what to say. They also attached a small recorder to Mohammed so they could listen in on his conversation with her. While monitoring the mobile gas station, the detectives unexpectedly witnessed a meeting between Mohammed and Dalia. Dalia's appearance made a strong impression on the detectives, as she did not resemble the usual image of someone who wanted to hire someone to kill her husband. Instead, Dalia wore a skirt and a tank top, looking very attractive. After the conversation, Dalia got into the car with Mohammed. At this point, Mohammed expressed his surprise, unable to believe that a woman like Dalia would lure him into a murder for hire. Mohammed asked Dalia if it was worth killing her husband. Dalia said yes, because she could not get a divorce. She was afraid that her husband would come after her if she tried to end the marriage. Dalia revealed her plan. After her husband was killed, she would go somewhere else, like Boca Raton, to create an alibi. Mohammed asked if anyone would suspect Dalia after her husband's death. She replied that no one would suspect her. The detectives were listening to a conversation between Mohammed and a woman. They were shocked to hear the woman calmly discussing hiring a hitman to kill her husband. This made the detectives shiver. As the conversation continued, Mohammed made specific moves on the woman. She showed Mohammed pictures of her husband so he could identify the target. The detectives were shocked by Dalia's nonchalance about the consequences of her actions. She spoke so calmly that it sounded like she was discussing a normal business transaction, not planning a murder. However, detectives realized that they needed to gather more evidence to strengthen the case. She suggested to Mohammed that she would withdraw $1,000 in cash and pay him later. After concluding the conversation about hiring a hitman to kill her husband, she got back in her car and left the mobile gas station. Detectives followed her home to determine where she lived. Records showed that the address belonged to someone else named Dippolito, and police concluded that she had used a false name to hire a hitman to kill her husband, not Dalia as they had previously thought. Detectives ran a background check on the car Dalia used to go to the gas station to meet Mohammed. They found that the car's registration was held by Mike Dippolito, Dalia's husband. To their friends, Mike and Dalia appeared to be a happy couple in love. They met when Mike was feeling bored and looking for a way to entertain himself. He surfed the internet and found a website that offered escort services. Mike decided to book a meeting, not knowing that this decision would change his life forever. When Mike's escort, Dalia, arrives, he is immediately enchanted by her beauty. He finds her stunning and feels an attraction between them. They instantly connect and quickly fall into intimate conversation. Over the next few days, Mike and Dalia's relationship deepens. They meet again and spend a week together. They have a great time together, and they realize that their feelings have gone beyond friendship. From there, Mike and Dalia officially become a couple. After a few months of dating, Mike and Dalia's relationship takes a significant step forward. During a visit to a local jewelry store, they unexpectedly looking at engagement rings. This leads to a deep conversation about marriage, a topic they had discussed before. Fascinated by the idea of building a future together, Mike decides to buy a ring for Dalia. It was not only a gift, but also a symbol of his commitment to the relationship. Even though their relationship was moving forward quickly, Mike was still extremely happy in love. He believed that this was the right move for both of their futures. Before meeting Dalia, Mike had a criminal record in 2001. He was convicted of theft, fraud, and wire fraud in Broward County, Florida. At the time, Mike was addicted to drugs and needed money. The court sentenced Mike to 2 years in prison and 28 years of probation. This long probation period was to give Mike the opportunity to pay off his debts. When Mike first returned home from prison, he had trouble paying his debts. Determined to solve this problem, Mike took a job as a cook at a restaurant for $350 a week. However, this was not enough to pay off his large debt. Mike wanted to improve his financial situation to pay off all his debts and ensure that he did not have to go back to prison. Fortunately, a friend introduced Mike to a new job at an office near his home, just 4 blocks away. This gave Mike the opportunity to move from his job as a chef to the field of email marketing, opening up better financial prospects. When Mike and Dalia began their relationship, Mike was honest about his difficult past and current restrictions. He explained that he could not freely travel between states without permission. Dalia, with her strong passion for travel, expressed her desire to explore the world with Mike. Realizing that the financial burden was hindering their dreams, Dalia proposed a bold solution. She was willing to give Mike $91,000 so that he could pay off the remaining debt. This money would help them get out of debt and start a new life, free to travel like Dalia had always dreamed of. At that time, Dalia was working as a real estate agent and making a lot of money. With her stable finances, she was able to help Mike pay off his debt and clear his criminal record. Mike consulted his lawyer about how to handle the situation. The lawyer advised him to prepare enough money to be released from probation. After discussing, Dalia and Mike decided to transfer the money to Dalia's Bank of America account because it was the safest and most convenient way. Mike's joy about paying off his debt and getting married was quickly shattered. One day, he received a text message from Dalia informing him that she had transferred the money to his lawyer. Mike contacted the lawyer to confirm, but was surprised to be informed that they had not received any money from Dalia. 2 days after the transaction, the lawyer still has not received the money. Mike contacts Dalia, asking her for information about the money transfer and a receipt for verification. However, Dalia suspects that the lawyer has misappropriated the money. She tells Mike that she will try to get the money back. Meanwhile, Mike hopes that they can resolve this misunderstanding smoothly. On the other hand, the Boone Beach Police Department enlists the help of Sergeant Whitey Jean, an undercover police officer. When he meets with the detective in charge of the case, Sergeant Jean is informed that Dalia is trying to hire a hitman to kill her husband. The detective tells him that Dalia is waiting for a call from the hitman and asks Sergeant Jean to pose as the hitman to arrange a meeting with Dalia. Sergeant Whitey Jean agrees to participate in the investigation by posing as a hitman. In this role, he contacts Dalia and asks her to pay $3,000 up front and the keys to her house. The request for the keys was part of a plan to make Dalia believe that the murder would occur at her home. However, Dalia felt uncomfortable with the request. She contacted Muhammad, who had introduced her to the hitman, to express her concerns. During a phone call between Muhammad and Dalia, the detectives overheard and were concerned that they might have scared Dalia. They feared that Dalia might change her plans and find someone else to kill her husband. However, On August 3, 2009, Dalia met with Sergeant Whitey Jean in the CVS parking lot. Sergeant Whitey was working undercover, posing as a hitman. However, Dalia did not have any money with her. Sergeant Whitey informed Dalia that if he waited until after the murder to be paid, she would have to pay him $7,000 in cash. Sergeant Whitey Jean announced the assassination plan on Wednesday morning, citing the cover-up as a response to looting in the area. He revealed to Dalia that he would stage a fake break-in to give the act the appearance of legitimacy. Whitey Jean made it clear that he intended to pretend to break into the house, then shoot Mike twice in the head. Sergeant Whitey Jean informed Dalia that he would wait a few days before contacting her again after the murder of her husband. He explained that the police would be watching her closely after such a serious crime. Sergeant Whitey Jean emphasized that this wait was necessary to avoid suspicion and to keep the case secret. During the conversation, he also gave Dalia the opportunity to back out of the hit-for-hire plan. But Dalia asserted that she was absolutely certain and determined to carry out the plan to kill her husband, Mike. She revealed to Sergeant Whitey Jean that Mike walked his dog at a fixed time every morning and left the house unlocked when he left. This information was key to the plan to kill Mike. Dalia also said she would be at the gym at the time of the attack, ensuring that she would not be home when Sergeant Whitey arrived to carry out the plan. Sergeant Whitey Jean asked Dalia to be at the gym by 6 a.m. He announced that he would be at Dalia's house at 6:30 a.m. After finishing his conversation with Dalia, Sergeant Whitey Jean was shocked by her cruelty. Although he had met many people in his work, he had never met anyone as cruel as Dalia. The detective thought that creating a fake crime scene at Dalia and Mike's house was important to see Dalia's reaction. On the day of the attack, around 5:30 a.m., Dalia told Mike that she was going to work out. Mike agreed but found it strange because Dalia had never worked out so early. However, he did not think much of it and continued with his normal morning routine. The detective followed and confirmed that Dalia had gone to the gym. This provided the evidence the detective needed to continue with his plan. However, before he could proceed with setting things up at Mike and Dalia's house, the detective needed to inform Mike of the current situation. About 30 minutes after Dalia left the house to go to the gym, there was a loud knock on the door. Mike rushed to open the door and was surprised to see a group of police officers standing in front of the house. He was shocked and confused and asked what was going on. A detective walked in and told Mike some shocking news. His wife had hired a hitman to kill him. However, the hitman was actually an undercover cop assigned to expose Dalia's plot. The detective further explained that the whole situation was an elaborate plan set up to catch Dalia in the act of hiring a hitman to kill her husband. Mike was shocked when the police came to his house and informed him that his wife, Dalia, had hired a hitman to kill him. After calming down, the detectives emphasized the urgency of the situation and asked him to leave the house immediately. They quickly took Mike to the police station for safety. The detectives created a fake crime scene at Mike and Dalia's house. They put up police tape and turned on the police car lights to make it look like a real crime scene. After they were ready, a detective called Dalia and told her that the police were at her house and needed to talk to her about a matter involving her husband. The detective asked Dalia to come home and answer some questions. After speaking with the detective, Dalia returned home and was shocked to find that her house had become a crime scene. Police tape surrounded the house and police cars were parked everywhere. When Dalia asked the detective about the situation, she was informed that the police had received a report of a murder at her house, accompanied by gunshots. The detective then gave her the shocking news that a search of the house had turned up the body of her husband, Mike. This information shocked Dalia. She burst into tears as soon as she heard the news of her husband's death. However, the detective, who was experienced in announcing the death, noticed that Dalia's reaction was unusual. Although she appears to be crying, the detective does not see any tears on her face at the police station. The detective begins the investigation by asking Dalia about the people who may have been involved in her husband's death. The detective's goal is to get Dalia to admit that she hired someone to kill her husband. The detective tells Dalia that her husband was shot twice in the head and died. Dalia is confident that Mike will not open the door to strangers. She explains that Mike is currently on probation for securities fraud and is trying to complete his probation. However, this is difficult because the community is not supportive of Mike's upcoming release due to the amount of debt he owes. Despite this, Dalia insists that their marriage is stable. During the investigation of Mike's husband's murder, the police interrogate her. Mike watches the interrogation from another room. The detective informs Dalia that they have the facts of the case and will begin investigating. They then led Sergeant Whitey Jean into the room, handcuffed, and asked Dalia if she knew him or had met him before. Dalia firmly denied any connection to Sergeant Whitey Jean. After the police escorted Sergeant Whitey Jean out of the room, the detective informed Dalia that she was under arrest for attempted murder. The detective further explained that the man Dalia had hired to kill her husband was actually an undercover police officer. As a result, Dalia was arrested for her crime. While Dalia was in custody, the police allowed Mike, Dalia's husband and the victim of the attempted murder, to see her. When Dalia saw Mike, she tried to call him back, but Mike refused, saying that he could not help her in this situation. In fact, Mike wanted Dalia to admit to plotting to kill him, but she still firmly denied her actions. On April 26, 2011, Dalia Dippolito's trial was held in Palm Beach County District Court. Dalia was charged with conspiring to hire someone to kill her husband, Mike. During the trial, Mike testified against his wife. He testified for 3 consecutive days. Dalia's defense attorney argued that the plan to kill Mike was just a publicity stunt for a reality television show. They claimed that Mike had agreed to participate and helped orchestrate the plot. However, Mike denied all things. He claimed that he had no knowledge of or involvement in any such plan. Mike stated that he had no interest in participating in a reality television show and would never waste money or put himself in danger for that purpose. After closing arguments, the jury deliberated for hours and ultimately found Dalia guilty of solicitation of first-degree murder with a firearm. When the verdict was announced, Mike had mixed feelings. He was relieved that Dalia was serving a 20-year prison sentence, a fair sentence for her serious crime. At the same time, he was relieved that he could finally move on with his life, knowing that justice had been served. After Dalia was convicted of solicitation of first-degree murder with a firearm, her lawyers appealed. They argued that the jury's verdict had been influenced by an unofficial tip. Specifically, a juror had commented that Dalia had tried to poison Mike's Starbucks drink. However, this information was never introduced into evidence at trial. By law, juries are only allowed to evaluate evidence that is formally presented in court. As a result, the Court of Appeals overturned Dalia's conviction and decided that she was entitled to a new trial. Mike was surprised to learn that there would be a second trial for Dalia, even though she had been convicted of conspiring to kill him. In December 2016, the state held a second trial, believing that they had enough evidence to prove that Dalia had incited her husband to kill her. However, the outcome was not as expected when the jury could not reach a consensus. Ultimately, the judge decided to hold a new trial. Dalia faced a third trial in June 2017. After the trial, it took the jury just 90 minutes to reach a final verdict. They found Dalia guilty and sentenced her to 16 years in prison. In September 2019, Dalia Dippolito asked the Florida Supreme Court to review her 2017 conviction. However, the court denied the request without comment. After Dalia was convicted, her defense team attempted to take the case to the U.S. Supreme Court for review. However, In February 2020, the court declined to take it. Despite this, Dalia Dippolito's attorneys told the press that they were undeterred and were still determined to overturn the conviction. They revealed plans to petition a federal judge for a third review of Dalia's trial on constitutional grounds. The attorney said this was Dalia's last chance to secure a new trial. Despite serving her sentence, Dalia was respected in prison for her strong faith. She organized a Bible study group in prison, which was praised by her fellow inmates. Before going to prison, Dalia had a young son who visited her regularly. The boy is now living with his grandmother until Dalia completes her sentence. According to her lawyer, the separation has been heartbreaking for Dalia because she misses her son very much. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Jennifer Brown. Jennifer Brown, born in 1979, is an energetic and vibrant woman. She has the ability to spread positive energy to those around her through her optimistic attitude and way of life. People who know her often wonder how she can do so much and still maintain such a positive spirit. But in fact, her positive energy comes from being a mother, a role that she always loves and cherishes. She and her son Noah have a special relationship. Although no one knows about Noah's father, it does not affect their lives. Jennifer became stronger after Noah was diagnosed with autism. She has become a strong support and best friend to her son. The relationship between Jennifer and Noah is known and admired by everyone. They spend a lot of time together, share happy moments and support each other when needed. The small town also loved the family for their cheerfulness and kindness. However, no one could have predicted Jennifer's disappearance. On January 3, 2023, she disappeared without a trace. The next morning, the Limerick Township Police Department received a missing person call from Antonio Blair Watts Richardson, a close friend of Jennifer's. Although it had been less than 24 hours since he last saw or heard her voice, his anxiety was growing. Blair Watts had been trying to contact Jennifer for hours without success. All his attempts went unanswered. This behavior was completely unlike her, as she was a responsible person who always answered calls or messages, especially when it came to matters related to her son Noah. However, on this day, the boy's mother did not come to pick him up after school. This made Jennifer's family and friends very worried, as they knew her to be a caring mother who always cared about her children. This sudden disappearance made everyone feel uneasy. Blair Watts' call to the police was the beginning of a long and mysterious investigation that would later affect the entire city and cause a great tragedy. After Blair Watts reported his girlfriend missing, a major search began. Police, family, and friends joined forces, hoping to find any clues that could shed light on Jennifer's disappearance. Many questions were raised, and the main one was what could have caused this caring mother to abandon her son without any explanation. At 4 p.m. that afternoon, Officer Stephen Crawford of the Limerick Township Police Department arrived at Jennifer's family home to investigate the situation. Upon arrival, Officer Stephen found Jennifer's car still parked on the front porch. Upon entering the home, he discovered that her keys, wallet, and tablet were still inside the home. However, Jennifer's cell phone was nowhere to be found. During further investigation, police discovered that Jennifer's phone had been turned off at 7 a.m. on January 4th and had not been located since. The phone's last recorded location was near Lewis Road and Ridge Pike in Limerick Township. This discovery was a serious sign in the investigation, suggesting that something terrible might have happened to Jennifer. Young Jennifer Brown is missing and the police have begun an investigation. Investigators have questioned her family, friends, and neighbors, hoping to find information about her disappearance. However, no one has been able to provide useful information. Aunt Diane Bram and Jennifer's friends Tiffany Barron and Blair Watts are convinced that Jennifer would never have left alone. The reason is that she could not leave her son. She was a loving and devoted mother. All efforts by authorities and volunteers have been fruitless. They have not found any trace or clues to Jennifer's whereabouts. Her loved ones have appealed to the public through the media for information about her disappearance. A reward has been offered, but to no avail. Jennifer Brown's disappearance has left both investigators and her family with many questions and concerns. The police investigation has begun to examine every detail of the day she went missing. Blair Watts, the last close friend to see Jennifer alive, has come forward to share her story. On a typical January afternoon, Jennifer and Blair Watts chatted intimately in the warm living room about life, future plans, and their children. The two families' children often played together, and Jennifer asked Blair to pick up Noah from school so they could enjoy the evening together. This was normal for them because they were close friends. However, the next day, when Blair Watts went to pick up Noah from school, things took a strange turn. Noah was behaving erratically and the teachers were worried. They discovered that Noah had missed 2 important doses of medication to help control his illness. Jennifer was a very caring and nurturing mother. So when she did not contact the school about Noah's situation, everyone was surprised. School officials searched for information about Jennifer and discovered that she had left home to go to the grocery store but did not return as scheduled. This was very unlike Jennifer, who was always worried and concerned about her children. This incident made everyone even more worried. Jennifer's friend, Blair Watts, tried to contact her but was unsuccessful. When she did not receive a response, Blair Watts decided to check if Jennifer had picked up her son at the bus stop. However, when Jennifer did not appear, Blair Watts became concerned and decided to report the incident to the police. After the report, no new information about Jennifer's whereabouts emerged. Hopes of her return faded. It seemed that Jennifer had disappeared without a trace. However, on January 18th, 2 weeks after the disappearance was reported, 2 employees working in a warehouse near Roseford discovered a newly dug hole. When they investigated, they discovered the body of a woman buried in a shallow grave. The workers immediately notified the police, who went to the burial site. After an autopsy, the police identified the young woman as Jennifer Brown. The sheriff contacted her family and informed them that Jennifer's body had been discovered near a warehouse in Roseford. Jennifer's autopsy revealed that she had died from abuse and asphyxiation. She also had 3 broken ribs, indicating that she had struggled with her attacker before she died. This evidence changed the nature of the investigation, and the missing person case was upgraded to a homicide case. The police began questioning people close to Jennifer, including her family and friends. However, these interviews did not yield any new information, and the police have yet to find a suspect. The investigation seemed to be at a standstill as no new evidence emerged. But surprisingly, the police received important information from Noah's former teacher. After Jennifer was reported missing, the police asked anyone with information to contact them. This call caught the attention of a former teacher of Noah, who decided to come forward to the police. A teacher recalled Jennifer's case, which initially seemed trivial but raised suspicions after the verdict. The teacher said Noah shared with her a key piece of information regarding the incident that occurred on January 4th, the day Jennifer went missing. Noah told her that when Blair Watts picked him up from the bus stop on January 3rd, he saw his mother's personal cell phone in Blair Watts' pocket. He immediately recognized the phone because a childhood photo of himself was displayed on the lock screen. This became the key to the investigation into Jennifer's murder. The police had previously assumed that the killer had taken Jennifer's cell phone, but Blair Watts now became the prime suspect. As they delved deeper into the relationship between Jennifer and Blair Watts, hidden secrets began to emerge. This surprised the investigators. On the surface, the relationship between the two seems very close and understanding, and their families also interact frequently. However, when looking closely at the business transactions, the seemingly simple initial relationship turns out to be hidden under a layer of long-standing hatred. In fact, this friendship is closely tied to their business, and that creates unpredictable conflicts. What's more special, people have discovered disputes stemming from that relationship. For example, the breakdown of the business left Blair Watts with emotional conflicts that were difficult to overcome when the Bird's Kitchen store itself was closed in January 2022. After approaching Jennifer, in August 2022, Blair Watts received an offer of help. Jennifer decided to invest in his business to help revive Bird's Kitchen at a new location. Under the agreement, Jennifer would provide financial support to the restaurant every 6 weeks or so. Between August and January, Jennifer transferred $36,000 to Blair Watts to rebuild the business. She also agreed to provide an additional $99,000. However, Blair used the money for her own personal needs instead of investing in the restaurant. When the property owner discovered that Blair Watts had not met her financial obligations, they terminated the lease on December 26, 2022. This left Blair Watts in a desperate situation, losing money and the opportunity to reopen the restaurant. In desperation, Blair decided to commit a serious crime to save her business. During the investigation of Jennifer's case, investigators scrutinized the financial transaction history on her iPad. They discovered 2 illegal transfers of $177,000 to Bird's Kitchen on January 3. These payments were not mentioned in the official agreement between Jennifer and Blair Watts. It is worth noting that these transfers initially failed because Jennifer's iPad had two-factor authentication enabled. However, after disabling the authentication system, the transfers were successful. This led investigators to suspect that Jennifer's boyfriend, Blair Watts, may have been involved in the murder. Investigators interviewed the property owners Blair Watts had rented. They discovered that on January 4th, the same day Blair Watts reported Jennifer missing, he came to them to sign the lease, claiming he had the money. Police then conducted an interview with Blair Watts' wife, Tiara Taylor, to determine where Blair Watts had been on the day Jennifer went missing. Tiara said Blair Watts had visited Jennifer's family on January 3rd and did not return home until early the next morning. He returned home briefly, then left around 5 p.m. and did not return home until late in the evening. Further investigation revealed that Blair Watts had stayed at the home of his mistress, Tatiana Garrett, and did not see anyone else until around 8 p.m. This meant that between 5 p.m. and 8 p.m., Blair Watts had no evidence to suggest that he was not at the scene of the crime. Based on the available evidence, detectives developed a scenario for the murder. According to this scenario, on January 3rd, Blair Watts went to Jennifer's house around 1 p.m. while Noah was at school and likely killed her. After committing the crime, Blair Watts transferred money from Jennifer's iPad to his account. He then picked up Noah at the bus stop around 4 p.m. When he returned to Jennifer's house, he dropped Noah off and returned to the crime scene to dispose of the body. He took the body to a field near Roseford and buried it in a shallow grave. Blair Watts then went to Tatiana's house and stayed there overnight. However, he made a serious mistake. He let Noah see his mother's cell phone. This was important evidence that helped the police quickly find the killer. Law enforcement had enough evidence to convict, but they decided to investigate further to gather more information. To investigate further, the police requested the participation of film experts and a specially trained dog that could detect the scent of a corpse. First, the dog was brought to Jennifer's house to memorize the woman's scent. The police then led the dog to Blair Watts' car and it immediately detected a foul odor. This was the final key piece of evidence that solidified detectives' belief that Blair Watts was involved in the murder. On February 8, after months of investigation, Blair Watts was arrested and charged with aggravated murder, and burglary. He is currently being held in the Montgomery County Correctional Facility without bail, awaiting a preliminary hearing. When Jennifer's friends and family found out she was dead, they were shocked and heartbroken. But what made them even more heartbroken was that the killer was someone they knew and trusted. Now that Blair Watts has been arrested and brought to trial, they can finally rest easy knowing that justice has been served. Tiffany Barron, a friend of Jennifer's, spoke on behalf of the family. In an interview, she expressed her feelings. She still dreams about Jennifer. Jennifer's son, Noah, keeps asking about his mother and she doesn't know how to answer. If Blair Watts is convicted after the investigation and trial, he will spend the rest of his life in prison. The case was solved thanks to the keen observation of Jennifer's 8-year-old son. He discovered Blair Watts' mistake, helped solve the case and punish the culprit. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Wang Nan. Wang Nan, born in 1987 in Nanjing, China, a major city and former capital, Wang Nan grew up in a relatively affluent family. Her parents provided her with the best possible education and encouraged her to develop her talents. After completing her secondary education, Wang Nan enrolled in a prestigious university, where she studied business and finance, and also learned several foreign languages. Upon graduation, she landed a job at a large travel agency, where she quickly proved herself to be a valuable, responsible, and motivated employee. Her career advanced rapidly, and she was soon sent to Thailand to head a new branch and oversee its development. Wang Nan worked as a top manager for several years before deciding to leave the agency to start her own business. She opened a Chinese restaurant in Bangkok, which she managed successfully, and it eventually grew into a small but popular chain. Wang Nan was a thriving young entrepreneur who had devoted her life to her career. With her constant business engagements, she barely had time for socializing or dating, and her loneliness became a normal part of her life. At almost 30 years old, Wang Nan was well established in Thailand, having lived there for a while and become proficient in the language. However, she strived for further improvement, taking additional courses to learn Thai at a training center. There, she met a young man named Yu Xiaodong, who initially stared at her before introducing himself in his native language. They exchanged brief conversations, and he inquired about her reason for studying the language. Wang Nan replied that it was for business purposes, and Yu Xiaodong proposed exchanging business cards to potentially meet up Sunday. Although Wang Nan was not interested in continuing the conversation, she still politely gave him her business card. Yu Xiaodong also gave Wang Nan his own business card, which said that he worked in the import-export industry in Bangkok. Not very impressed, Wang Nan put the business card in her wallet and forgot about it. Yu Xiaodong was the only one who showed genuine interest in Wang Nan, and he wasted no time in calling her the very next day. However, she was preoccupied with work and couldn't spare even a few minutes to talk, so she declined his invitation to meet for coffee. A few days later, Yu Xiaodong asked her out again, but Wang Nan turned him down once more, citing her busy schedule and preparations for an upcoming business conference where she hoped to expand her professional network. Undeterred, Yu Xiaodong showed up at the conference with a stunning bouquet of flowers and waited for Wang Nan to become available. When she was free, he approached her and asked her out once more. This time, Wang Nan was charmed by his persistence, which was a new experience for her. No one had ever pursued her so relentlessly before, so she agreed to meet him for dinner. As it turned out, Yu Xiaodong's interest in Wang Nan was more than just a passing infatuation. He was completely smitten. He showered her with attention, surprise gifts, and romantic gestures, including sending flowers to her doorstep every morning with sweet notes attached. He also called her at least twice a day to wish her good morning and good night. Wang Nan had mixed emotions about the situation. While she was irritated by Yu Xiaodong's all-consuming infatuation, she was also flattered that someone was making such an effort to win her heart. As a result, she found herself unexpectedly entering into a romantic relationship. Yu Xiaodong went out of his way to woo her, not only romantically but also by trying to be perfect in every aspect of their relationship. He shared her interests and opinions, learned to cook her favorite meals, and planned exciting activities for them to enjoy together. He was also eager to help her with her work and household chores at a moment's notice. Wan Nan was over the moon with happiness, feeling as though she was living in a fairy tale. Yu Xiaodong's behavior, however, was moving at a breakneck pace. Despite having only been together for a few months, he was already making plans for their wedding and discussing potential names for their future children. This made Wan Nan uncomfortable, but Yu Xiaodong would counter by pointing out that they were both in their 30s and that it was time for them to start thinking about building a family. That night, Yu Xiaodong wrote a heartfelt letter to Wan Nan, expressing his deep affection and commitment to being a good husband and father. The next morning, he arrived at her doorstep with a bouquet of flowers, reiterating his seriousness about marrying her. Wan Nan jokingly mentioned that the courthouse wouldn't open for another hour and a half, but Yu Xiaodong suggested they go there immediately. To her surprise, the courthouse was open, and the officer responsible for registering marriages was already at his desk, ready to formalize their union. Yu Xiaodong had secretly arranged for a hasty marriage ceremony to take place early in the morning. The whole event was unusual and lacking in formality. There were no guests, no exchange of rings, no wedding dress or veil, and no commemorative photographs. Wan Nan couldn't shake the feeling that the whole thing wasn't really happening, especially since she hadn't even introduced her new husband to her mother, with whom she was extremely close. Before she knew it, she was holding a marriage certificate in her hand, and her newlywed husband was standing beside her, beaming with satisfaction. Wan Nan's marriage was troubled from the start. She had second thoughts about marrying Yu Xiaodong almost immediately after the wedding. Initially, she had hoped he would be a reliable partner, a man she could depend on. Unfortunately, her expectations were not met, and her new husband's true nature soon revealed itself. Yu Xiaodong spent most of his time at home playing video games, using his wife's money without contributing to their household expenses. Whenever his wife asked him why he wasn't working, he claimed his business was slow due to seasonal fluctuations and that he was just taking a break. However, her suspicions grew as time passed, and she decided to investigate his business. Her findings shocked her. His supposedly successful import-export company existed only on paper and business cards. Wan Nan was horrified, realizing too late that she should have had a prenuptial agreement. Now, her husband could freely spend her earnings, and if they divorced, he would claim her assets. During a tense conversation, Yu Xiaodong broke down in tears, promising to turn his life around and find a good job. However, it soon became apparent that he had no intention of looking for work and was content to rely on his wife's support. Yu Xiaodong, a grown man, consistently acted like a child. He spent most of his time playing computer games and expected his wife, Wan Nan, to pay for his personal expenses whenever he helped out around the house or assisted her at the restaurant. Wan Nan eventually had enough and told him she would no longer give him money unless he got a job. The next day, Yu Xiaodong disappeared, taking their marriage certificate and Wan Nan's identity card with him. Wan Nan only discovered the missing documents that evening when her accountant called to inquire about a large transfer of funds from her account. She was shocked, as she had not authorized the transfer. However, she immediately suspected her husband's involvement. It turned out that Yu Xiaodong had transferred more than $500,000 into his own account, using the stolen documents to deceive the bank into thinking it was their joint decision to transfer their shared money. Wan Nan quickly reported the theft to the police, who tracked down Yu Xiaodong a few hours later as he attempted to withdraw some of the stolen money. Confronted by the police and his wife, Xiaodong broke down and begged for forgiveness on his knees. He confessed to losing a large sum of money through gambling, which had led to threats of death and demands to repay the debt. This was not his first brush with the law, as he had previously served an 8-year prison sentence for robbery in his home country of China. One man was consumed by shame as she learned the truth about her husband's past. Despite this, she believed that his addiction to gambling was a disease that could be overcome, and she wanted to help him recover and return to a normal life. To support him, Wang Nan agreed to pay off half of his debt and offered him a job as heger of one of her restaurants. Initially, Yu Xiaodong appeared to be grateful for the opportunity and took his new role seriously. He even developed a promising strategy for the restaurant's growth. However, his enthusiasm was short-lived. Before long, he began to spend more time playing computer games and indulging in other leisure activities. Meanwhile, one man discovered she was pregnant and shared the news with her husband. Yu Xiaodong initially expressed reservations about the pregnancy, and in a moment of hesitation, asked his wife to consider an abortion, which she flatly refused. The disagreement escalated to the point where he threatened divorce and division of their property, but eventually, his demeanor softened, and he apologized for his rash words. Yu Xiaodong later admitted that his outburst was driven by emotional anxiety, but ultimately, he was happy about the impending arrival of their child. However, things took a dramatic turn 2 months later. During a fateful trip, Yu Xiaodong suggested that his wife purchase life insurance, citing the pregnancy as a reason to safeguard her well-being and that of their unborn child in the event of any unforeseen circumstances. This seemingly caring gesture came after a period of harmony in their marriage, where he had been attentive, supportive, and diligent in his role as a husband and expectant father. Wang Nan quickly agreed to her husband's suggestion and even wondered why she hadn't thought of it herself. They purchased insurance the very next day. A couple of weeks later, Yu Xiaodong proposed a vacation to help them relax and unwind. Wang Nan was initially hesitant, but her husband was insistent. He pointed out that they had never had a honeymoon and that traveling with a baby would be difficult in the coming years. He also felt that they needed a break to clear their minds of the stress and negativity they had been experiencing. Wang Nan was eventually won over by her husband's arguments and agreed to the trip. He took charge of planning the entire vacation, choosing the destination, booking the hotel, and organizing activities that would be enjoyable and educational, yet not too strenuous for Wang Nan's pregnant state. Wang Nan was happy to leave the planning to her husband and was pleased to see how much effort he was putting into making their vacation special. On June 7th, they visited the park for the first time and spent most of the day exploring its many beautiful sights and lookouts. However, as the summer evening wore on, the park became increasingly crowded, with tourists everywhere. As the sun began to set, Wang Nan noticed that her husband, Yu Xiaodong, was growing angry and nervous. When she asked him what was wrong, he explained that the crowds were ruining their chance to enjoy a romantic sunset in peace. Despite his initial frustration, Yu Xiaodong tried to make the most of the situation, suggesting that they could still have a romantic moment as the sun set. As the park began to clear out, he climbed the fence of the observation deck and called out to his wife, Wang Nan, to join him, promising her an incredible view. However, Wang declined, citing the darkness and potential danger. Yu Xiaodong became angry but eventually returned to his wife, suggesting that they should come back to the park another time to watch the sunrise together. The Wang Nan and Yu Xiaodong returned to their hotel late on Saturday night, so they decided to sleep in and head back to the reserve early on Sunday morning. As planned, they woke up at 3 a.m. on June 9th and left for the national park while it was still dark outside. Their goal was to catch the first rays of the rising sun. When they arrived, they found the park nearly empty, with hardly any other visitors. They watched the sunrise together on an observation deck. Then, Yu Xiaodong encouraged his wife, Wang Nan, to join him at the cliff's edge to see some ancient rock paintings. Initially hesitant, Wang Nan trusted her husband's assurance that he would help her climb down and back up safely. As they took in the breathtaking view, Yu Xiaodong suddenly asked Wang Nan if she regretted anything in life. She replied that she did not. However, in a shocking turn of events, Yu Xiaodong's demeanor changed. He touched his wife's hair, kissed her cheek, whispered "die" in her ear, and then pushed her off the cliff. To avoid detection, he checked their surroundings to make sure no one had witnessed the incident. Looking down, he couldn't see where Wang Nan had fallen. And the silence indicated that there were no witnesses below. Yu Xiaodong calmly walked towards the park exit, planning to report the incident after his wife was surely dead. However, hikers who had wandered off the trail spotted Wang Nan's body on the rocks and immediately called for rescue, reporting the incident. As Yu Xiaodong was leaving the reserve, several emergency vehicles sped past him, sirens blaring. Realizing what was happening, he quickly returned to the scene, pretending to be distressed. There, he put on a convincing performance, crying and begging for help. Convinced that his wife was dead and no one would discover the truth, he remained unaware that Wang Nan's fall had been broken by tree branches, which reduced her speed before she landed on bushes and then rolled onto the rocks. This series of events cushioned the impact, saving her life and that of their child, although she suffered severe injuries. Yu Xiaodong was overcome with grief, crying and lamenting the loss of his wife and child. However, his wife suddenly regained consciousness and attempted to speak, but was unable to. The people around her noticed the genuine horror on Yu Xiaodong's face, but he quickly composed himself and leaned in close to his wife. In a hushed tone, he warned her in Chinese to remain silent if she wanted to survive. Wang Nan's injuries were severe, including head trauma, multiple fractures, lacerations, soft tissue contusions, ruptured internal organs, and massive blood loss. Her spine was also severely damaged, leaving doctors concerned that even if she survived, she would likely be paralyzed and never walk again. One man spent several days in a coma, connected to life support machines, during which time her husband remained by her side constantly. However, despite his devoted appearance, Yu Xiaodong's intentions were sinister. Every time he was alone with his wife, he thought about how to complete the job without arousing suspicion. His actions were a ruse, hiding his true intentions behind a mask of love and devotion that he examined the devices, but couldn't find a way to quietly disable them. Wang Nan slowly regained consciousness. When she did, her husband was beside himself with fear. He stayed with her constantly, terrified that she would reveal the truth to the police at any moment. When they were alone, he threatened her again, saying he had nothing to lose. During the initial police interrogation, the Wang Nan supported her husband's claim that her fall was caused by dizziness. However, when her husband briefly left the room, Wang Nan asked the nurse to call the police again and prevent her husband from re-entering. It was then that she recounted the disturbing story of her fall, alleging that her husband had attempted to kill her. Yu Xiaodong suddenly burst into the room, shouting that his wife was delusional due to her head injury and that he would never harm her or their baby. His explanation was not believable, and he was arrested on the same day. At the hospital, he was charged with multiple crimes, including attempted murder and intimidation after her husband was taken into custody and sent to jail to await trial. Wang Nan finally felt a sense of relief. Although she still had a long and difficult recovery ahead of her, she now felt safe. Wang Nan initially held on to hope that her pregnancy could be saved, despite the severe fall. However, her medical team advised her to terminate the pregnancy due to the large amounts of painkillers and antibiotics she was receiving, as well as the multiple surgeries she underwent under general anesthesia. The doctors prioritized Wang Nan's life, warning her that the fetus was unlikely to survive the strong medications. This news came as a devastating shock to Wang Nan, but she ultimately followed the doctor's advice. During the trial, Yu Xiaodong vehemently denied any wrongdoing, sticking to his claim that the incident was an accident. He remained calm and composed in prison, hiring skilled lawyers and expressing confidence that he would either be acquitted or receive a lenient sentence. In contrast, the investigators and prosecutor were convinced that Yu Xiaodong had deliberately committed the crime. Motivated by the prospect of collecting a substantial insurance payout and inheriting his wife's fortune, which was valued at nearly $2.5 million at the time. During an interrogation, Yu Xiaodong made a shocking revelation about his motive for the heinous crime. He disclosed that he was angry with his wife for not paying off his entire debt, which had accumulated due to his gambling habit. In his mind, if his wife truly loved him, she would have cleared all his debts since she had the financial means to do so. This perceived betrayal led Yu Xiaodong to believe that his wife did not love him, and therefore, he felt justified in punishing her. After making this astonishing confession, the defendant became silent, seemingly aware that he had revealed too much. He attempted to retract his statement, claiming that he had been misunderstood. Nevertheless, his unexpected admission, combined with Wang Nan's testimony, was sufficient to secure a lengthy prison sentence. In March 2021, Yu Xiaodong was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment. However, he and his lawyers filed multiple appeals, and 6 months later, the Thai court showed unusual leniency by reducing the life sentence to 10 years in prison. Wang Nan and her family were shocked and outraged by the lenient sentence given to Yu Xiaodong, believing it would set a bad precedent and encourage others to commit similar heinous crimes. Yu Xiaodong received a sentence of 10 years for attempting to murder his pregnant Wang Nan. As of now, Yu Xiaodong is serving her 10-year sentence while Wang Nan is challenging the court's decision. Meanwhile, Yu Xiaodong is filing appeals to prove her innocence. Wang Nan has successfully restarted her business in 2023 and also established an organization that provides support to women who have been affected by domestic violence. She writes about her personal experiences and warnings for women on her blog. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Jessica Knott. Jessica Knott was born on June 22, 1986, in Allamont Springs, Florida. She grew up in a loving family with her parents, an older brother, and a younger sister. Her father worked in construction and often traveled to other states for work, so her mother mainly took care of her and her siblings. Throughout her childhood, Jessica was a cheerful and active girl who loved playing outdoors with her friends and siblings and had a special love for animals. On April 5, 1996, when Jessica was 9 years old, her family planned to visit her grandparents for Easter. While her mother packed for the trip, her father went to the store to buy some vacation items. Jessica asked her mother if she could go to the yard to wait for her father to return. Her mother agreed but told her to stay in the yard and not wander off. The family's apartment complex was located in a quiet area, surrounded by many trees and away from the main road. The neighborhood was considered safe, and children often played outside without regular adult supervision. However, when Jessica's father returned home around 6 p.m., he asked his wife where Jessica was, and she was surprised to learn that Jessica was not in the yard as she had thought. The parents searched the yard but couldn't find their daughter Jessica. Growing increasingly worried, they started asking neighbors if they had seen Jessica. A neighbor reported seeing Jessica sitting on a bench, reading a book, but this information yielded no results. As night began to fall and Jessica was still missing, her parents contacted the police. The police quickly began search operations, questioning neighbors and canvassing the surrounding area. Despite their best efforts, they were unable to find Jessica, forcing the police to expand their search to nearby streets. A few hours later, the police received an unexpected call from an unknown number. The caller's voice was distorted by background noise. But the police determined that Jessica might have been near a water pumping station several miles from her home. When the police arrived at the water pumping station, they witnessed a horrifying scene. Jessica's body was discovered near the pumping station, hidden in a black trash bag. This location was only a few meters from the road, but the pumping station was located under a bridge, making it nearly impossible to detect. Next to the body were some magazines and a children's mirror. The police quickly identified the victim as Jessica Knott and handed her body over to the medical examiner for further investigation. Investigators turned their attention to tracing the 911 call, which they believed was made by the killer. Their goal was to use the call to identify the killer. However, the call was made from a public phone at a nearby gas station, and when the police arrived, the perpetrator had already fled. Detectives tried to take fingerprints, but it was a difficult task because this was a public phone booth, which likely had many fingerprints from different users. In addition, it was possible that the killer had wiped the phone clean after calling or had worn gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints. Further investigation revealed that Jessica may have been killed elsewhere and her body moved to the water pumping station. Evidence on the ground showed that the killer pulled the body out of the car, then put it in a trash bag and dragged it to the water pumping station. Jessica's clothes were still intact, except for a missing shoe, which was not found at the scene. The only potential clue at the crime scene was tire tracks on the ground. There was a possibility that they belonged to the killer's car, so the police took photos and analyzed the prints. Meanwhile, a medical examination of the body showed that the victim died from strangulation, with marks on the face and neck indicating the killer used bare hands. An autopsy showed that Jessica had eaten a hamburger shortly before her death. Her mother said she did not give Jessica a hamburger that day, suggesting the killer may have provided her with food. Additionally, forensic experts found no evidence of sexual assault, leaving the killer's motive unknown. Initially, police had suspected Jessica's parents of being involved in her disappearance because they had not had a solid alibi. Jessica's mother had claimed that she had packed up the apartment, and her father had claimed that he had been out shopping, so they clearly had had the opportunity to commit the crime. The police had been confused as to how the killer had been able to get Jessica out of the yard without anyone noticing or her screaming, leading them to believe that the killer might have been someone Jessica knew and trusted, and she might have voluntarily left with them. The killer's voice on the 911 call had provided another clue. In the recording, experts had detected feelings of grief and remorse, suggesting that the killer had truly felt remorse for his actions. The fact that the killer had taken the risk of calling 911 suggested that they might have been trying to minimize guilt or manipulate the investigation. However, the obvious sadness in the killer's voice had led investigators to believe that the killer had likely been remorseful for his actions. The investigation had reached a turning point when police had found a roll of black garbage bags in the trunk of Jessica's father's car, similar to the bag used to dispose of the victim's body. However, expert examination had shown that the bags had come from another manufacturer, eliminating Jessica's father as a suspect. The focus of the investigation had then turned to other suspects. Forensic experts had conducted a thorough examination of the victim's clothes and body, thereby obtaining many clues. One notable discovery had been that there had been a significant amount of dog hair on Jessica's clothes, even though her family had not owned dogs. This suggested that the dog hair might have come from the perpetrator's dog. Additionally, human hair of an unidentified man had been found on Jessica's body, and experts had been working to extract the DNA profile from the sample. However, this process had taken several days. Further examination had revealed two strange fibers on Jessica's clothes that experts had analyzed and determined likely had originated from car seat covers and carpets. This finding had supported the theory that Jessica had been killed at a location other than the water pumping station and then transported there by car. To determine the breed of dog that had shed hair on Jessica's clothes, experts had used the FBI's specialized database, which contained microscopic photos of hair from many different dog breeds. By comparing fur samples with a database, experts had determined that the fur had belonged to a Shar-Pei. This discovery had suggested that the perpetrator might have owned a Shar-Pei and that the dog's fur had been transferred to Jessica's clothes at the perpetrator's home or in the car. According to investigators' initial theory, the killer might have lured Jessica into his car, taken her to buy hamburgers at McDonald's, and then taken her to his home, where she had been murdered. To aid the investigation, experts had tried to improve the quality of the phone call recordings, but this had proved difficult. They had decided to try a different approach and sought help from NASA, which had advanced audio enhancement tools originally designed for use in space recordings. NASA had agreed to assist and provide police with higher quality audio. However, experts still needed to sample the suspect's voice to compare with the call recording. Detectives had suspected that the killer might have known Jessica, so they had played the call recording for her mother, hoping she could recognize the voice. At first, she had said the voice was familiar but couldn't place it. When she had heard it a second time, she suddenly had realized that the voice belonged to a neighbor who had lived in their complex. Although she couldn't remember his name, she had told detectives that he often had taken his Shar-Pei for walks in the yard. Police had quickly identified this man as James Crow, 35 years old. Hours after Jessica had disappeared, investigators had questioned her neighbors, including James Crow. James had told them that he had seen Jessica in her yard while walking his dog, Pumpkin, a Shar-Pei. They had exchanged a few words and then he had left. Detectives had looked into his past and had found no history of criminal activity. He used to be a truck driver, but had been currently unemployed and had spent most of his time walking around the neighborhood with his dog. Detectives realized that the similarity in voice and breed of dog had not been enough to arrest James, so they obtained a search warrant for James' car. Inside, they found two disturbing clues. Under the front passenger seat, they discovered an empty Happy Meal bag, which was suspicious because James had no children and Jessica had had a McDonald's hamburger in her stomach. Additionally, the car had brand new tires that had barely been used, which James had claimed to have changed on the day Jessica was murdered. However, his previous tire had not been very old and could have lasted a few more years. Police investigated further and discovered that one of James' old tires had been left behind at an auto service. When they compared the tire tread pattern to prints found near Jessica's body, they did not match. However, it was possible that tire marks on the ground did not belong to the killer's car but to another vehicle. Police also searched James' apartment, where they found a box containing several rolls of trash bags similar in size and color to the one found on Jessica's body. To determine if there was any connection between the bags, detectives needed to find a way to prove that they had come from the same manufacturer. At first, this seemed impossible, as the bags had no distinctive markings or features and there were hundreds of manufacturers of similar products. The detectives had an idea to solve this problem. They contacted Roberts, a quality control specialist for the company that had manufactured the bags found in James' apartment. Roberts pinpointed the factory that had produced the bags based on a special code on the cardboard box containing the rolls. The code indicated that the product had come from a facility in Virginia. Roberts explained that a small amount of iron or titanium was added to the bag's composition, depending on its color. Because the factory produced bags in many different colors, the materials used in production changed constantly, causing the ratio of plastic and iron or titanium to change daily. To take advantage of this information, experts used high-intensity X-rays to measure the presence of iron and titanium in the plastic of handbags from the suspect's apartment and the crime scene. This analysis provided exact ratios of elements, which were identical in both bags. This suggested the bags had been made on the same day and possibly from the same batch. However, there was more to the story than that. During the production of garbage bags, microscopic debris accumulated on the machine and imprinted on the plastic sheets as they were rolled out. This created a unique stripe pattern on each bag, visible to the naked eye. Even though the debris on the conveyor belt was constantly changing, creating a new pattern every few hundred feet of fabric, the results were consistent enough to provide another possible lead in the investigation. The similarity of the bags suggested that not only had they been produced in the same batch, but they had also been produced within a short time frame, perhaps just a few hours apart. Comparison of the bags from the suspect's apartment and the crime scene revealed a striking match in the lines and patterns on the bags. On further inspection, experts showed that the bags had been rolled into bundles by machine, which could have created irregularities during the rolling process. Although these irregularities were hardly noticeable, they could be detected by examining the edges of the bag, where the folds formed a unique pattern. Upon re-examining the bags, experts discovered that the pattern on the bags at the suspect's apartment matched the pattern at the crime scene. Further analysis also revealed that fibers found on Jessica's clothing had matched the carpet in James' apartment and the upholstery of his car seat. An audio expert had also analyzed the 911 call recording and compared it to James's voice sample, concluding that the voice in the recording belonged to James. Although the evidence was only circumstantial, detectives still believed in James' involvement in the case and decided to arrest him. James was taken into custody, and the prosecution announced its intention to seek the death penalty. Despite James continuing to deny guilt, the case still went to trial. The prosecution presented its theories, highlighting James' frequent outdoor activities with his dog, which had earned him the trust of local children, including Jessica. According to police, James had met Jessica while walking his dog and had struck up a conversation. He offered to take her to McDonald's, and she agreed because she knew him. After the meal, James allegedly invited Jessica to his home. While his wife was away, evidence had shown that Jessica was actually at James's house that day, as fibers from his living room carpet were found on her clothes. The investigation revealed that James might have tried to attack Jessica, but something went wrong. Forensic evidence indicated that the killer had strangled Jessica with their bare hands and pressed their palms against her face, possibly to silence her if she tried to scream. Panicked, the killer then placed Jessica's body in a trash bag and transported it to their car without arousing suspicion from the neighbors. The killer dumped her body near a water station, called 911 from a nearby gas station, and returned home. During the preliminary hearings, James's attorneys attempted to defend the evidence, arguing that there was no concrete proof of James' guilt. Although the judge accepted the evidence, the defense pointed out that in murder cases, the standard of proof is higher and more direct. Therefore, the possibility that James could avoid the death penalty was very large. A plea agreement was offered to James based on the circumstances surrounding the case. The deal required him to plead guilty to second-degree murder and accept a sentence of 40 years in prison without parole, thereby avoiding the death penalty. 2 years after the murder, in the summer of 1998, James accepted the deal. Although he was not required to provide details about the crime, he said that one of the reasons he accepted the deal was to spare Jessica's family the torment of the trial. The prosecution believed James showed genuine remorse for his actions and used the 911 call as evidence. The purpose of the call was unclear, but it suggested James was trying to alleviate his guilt. However, Jessica's parents were not satisfied with this deal because they had hoped for the death penalty and wanted James to confess to the crime. Despite this, James remained silent about the details of his actions. James did not fully serve his sentence. He died in November 2011 at the age of 49 from health problems, taking with him details of his crimes and motives. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Gerardo couple. Jenner Gerardo was born December 19, 1970, in the city of Fort Wayne, Allen County, Indiana, USA. She spent her childhood and teenage years in the area. Jen Eyre graduated from Bishop Luers High School, where she achieved excellent results in advanced courses. She then attended Purdue University at Indianapolis, studying communication and actively participating in the theater arts program. Later, she continued her communication studies at Butler University. Jen Eyre earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in Communication and Theater Arts. Throughout her career, she worked in marketing for various Indiana companies, including roles in Carmel and Indianapolis. Notably, she served as marketing manager at Cercier Instrumentation for several years. In the summer of 1986, Jen Eyre met Mark Gerardo in Fort Wayne, Indiana. At the time, they were both teenagers, and Jen Eyre was working at a local Taco Bell. Mark was immediately drawn to her, captivated by her striking blue eyes and bright smile. Mark was initially unable to express his feelings to Jen Eyre. The romance between Mark and Jen Eyre only really began when they met again by chance after 4 years, at a nearby shopping mall where Jen Eyre was working. He began visiting her frequently, and one day, she encouraged him to make a move, asking him directly when he would take her out. Jen Eyre's confidence and willingness to speak her mind drew Mark to her. He described her demeanor as the opposite of his own, admiring her boldness. Melissa Murphy, a childhood friend of Jen Eyre's, recalled how excited Jen Eyre was when she first met Mark, saying Jen Eyre was convinced he was the one and would do anything for him. Mark and Jen Eyre got married on October 23, 1993, when Mark was 25 and Jen Eyre was 23. Their relationship, which began in adolescence, continued to flourish into adulthood. Mark reflected on their happiness together, saying he couldn't imagine spending his life with anyone else. However, like any couple, Mark and Jen Eyre faced challenges in their marriage and had to navigate the low points together. Mark said the arguments between him and his wife were very tense, and Jen Eyre always won because she wanted to be the one to make the final decision. Mark's high school friend, Mike Hartman, shared that although he wasn't privy to all the details of their relationship, he knew they had fierce disagreements. Despite their strong marriage, the 2008 financial crisis significantly impacted them. Mark later mentioned that it changed everything, and money became a major source of stress and arguments. In November 2011, they relocated to Greenville, South Carolina, where they found new marketing jobs. Exploring the state's beautiful landscapes brought them closer together, and their marriage experienced a renewal. However, their renewed life came to a halt in 2017. Jen Eyre lost her job, leaving her struggling to find a new one, and she was no longer the strong, confident woman she once was. Around this time, the couple felt it was time for a change and a fresh start. They decided to move to Delaware, and Mark began looking for a job right away. He came across a job posting at the University of Delaware for a creative director in the marketing department, a role that would come with supervisory responsibilities. Mark emailed his application and quickly received a response from a woman 15 years his junior, who would be his supervisor if he got the job. She invited him for an interview. Initially, Mark was nervous about working under someone 15 years younger than him, but his worries soon disappeared after meeting Meredith Chapman. This was their first encounter. At the time, Meredith was 33 years old and originally from Pennsylvania. She had graduated from the University of Delaware with a bachelor's in communication and a master's in education. She was married to Luke, a former New York City councilman, and they lived in Fairfield Crest, Delaware, with their dog Indy. The couple had married in 2009. During his interview, Mark was immediately drawn to Meredith's beauty and intelligence. He recalled thinking, "I have to work for this person," within 5 minutes of sitting across from her. He found her articulate, energetic, and passionate about her job, and was impressed by her accomplishments at such a young age. Meredith seemed impressed by Mark, as she immediately offered him the job. Mark gratefully accepted the offer and moved to Wilmington, Delaware in November 2017. His wife, Jen Eyre, stayed behind in South Carolina to lease out their home. Mark was excited about the new opportunity and the chance to advance his career. Unbeknownst to him, this marked the start of the demise of his marriage to Jen Eyre. Mark spent 45 days living alone in Delaware, getting to know Meredith better. They discovered they had a lot in common, and she invited him out for a drink one evening. Mark found it easy to talk to Meredith and opened up to her about his marriage to Jen Eyre, sharing some of his personal struggles. He also told her about the loss of his parents and brother. Mark was unaware of what was happening between him and Meredith at first. Mark stated that he really hadn't known what was happening. He admits that he feels affection for Meredith and expresses that being with her is a wonderful experience. After their dinner date, he started to understand his feelings and realized he was attracted to her. As Mark spent more time with Meredith, the issues in his marriage became more apparent. He began to compare Meredith to his wife, noting that Meredith praised him and made him feel appreciated, which was something his wife never did. Mark was really touched by Meredith's compliments. Mark was deeply attracted to Meredith, but he felt guilty about betraying his wife. As a result, he initially attempted to end his relationship with Meredith. However, he couldn't shake off the feelings he had developed for her, especially after learning that Meredith was unhappy in her own 9-year marriage. Mark explains that his relationship with Meredith is great, which made it difficult for him to shut down the relationship. He wanted to understand what drew them together. Before Jen Eyre joined her husband in Delaware, Mark and Meredith had already confessed their love for each other. Mark felt it was natural to express his love for Meredith, as the feeling was powerful. In December 2017, Jen Eyre moved north and noticed Mark's distant behavior. She soon confronted him, sensing that he might be involved with another woman. Jen Eyre asked Mark what was going on with him and said that he was acting different. Jen Eyre specifically mentioned Meredith because Mark often mentioned her when discussing new job. Although Mark initially denied the affair, Jen Eyre continued to question him, aware that something was amiss between him and Meredith. She began to closely monitor his activities. Mark is confused as to why Jen Eyre knows the private aspects of his affair with Meredith. Around Valentine's Day in 2008, Jen Eyre collected evidence that her husband was having an affair. However, this came at a cost. Mark discovered that Jen Eyre had hired a company to hack into his phone, allowing her to read his texts, view his photos, and access his call records with Meredith. Mark confessed to Jen Eyre that he had developed feelings for Meredith, unable to continue the deception. Jen Eyre, heartbroken but determined to save their marriage, asked Mark to attend marriage counseling with her, and he agreed. However, during their second session, Mark discovered a recording device hidden in his jacket. Initially thinking it was an anti-theft device, he realized it was actively recording him. Furious, Mark confronted Jen Eyre. She claimed she wanted to understand the extent of his relationship with Meredith and suspected they were planning something together. This has been marked the beginning of the end for Mark and Jen Eyre's marriage. Mark eventually told Jen Eyre that he intended to file for divorce in May 2018, once he had met the residency requirements in Delaware and could leave their shared home. During this period, Meredith Chapman's life was on an upward trajectory. She had landed a new role as assistant vice president at Villanova University in Pennsylvania and relocated to Radnor Township. Meanwhile, her marriage was coming to an end, paving the way for her to pursue a relationship with Mark. As Meredith and Mark's relationship deepened, Jen Eyre, was Mark's wife at that time, began consulting with divorce coach Sheila Brennan. Jen Eyre was struggling with feelings of bitterness and anger, stemming from being replaced by a younger woman. Her concerns were compounded by financial uncertainty, having moved north without securing a new job. Jen Eyre's situation continued to deteriorate, ultimately taking a toll on her mental health. Mark noticed her distress and suggested that she see a psychiatrist for professional help. He also encouraged her to reach out to family and friends, as she had mentioned suicidal thoughts and even threatened to jump out of a window. Mark stated that Jen Eyre appeared to have come to terms with their upcoming divorce. She walked up to him with a list of things she wanted him to do in the weeks before he officially moved out. Her requests included activities such as going on hikes, having dinner together, and generally spending quality time as a couple. Mark agreed to fulfill her requests, thinking it would help Jen Eyre be in a better emotional state. During this time, Jen Eyre appeared to be acting normally, although she would occasionally become emotional and break down in tears. Over the next few weeks, Jen Eyre started posting on the app Nextdoor. She was looking for recommendations for a good marriage counselor who could help couples that were close to getting a divorce. In her post, Jen Eyre specified that they needed a counselor with extensive education and experience in handling complex issues such as infidelity, depression, traumatic experiences, and child-parent dynamics. However, unbeknownst to Mark, Jen Eyre had secretly been planning her revenge. On the night of April 23, 2018, Mark and his wife Jen Eyre were scheduled to meet at a restaurant to discuss their divorce agreement. However, Jen Eyre sent Mark a series of messages, first saying she was running late, then telling him to go home as she wouldn't make it to the. Mark got up to leave, but minutes later, he received a disturbing picture from Jen Eyre, an image of trash with a condom in the middle. This led him to believe Jen Eyre was rummaging through Meredith's trash can outside her home. More text messages followed, including one that said he had ruined co-life. Jen Eyre's next messages were even more ominous, saying she hoped he never found happiness and she had said goodbye to Mark. Alarmed and fearing for Meredith's safety, Mark tried to contact Meredith multiple times, but all his calls and texts went unanswered. Worried about a confrontation between Jen Eyre and Meredith, Mark rushed to Meredith's house. What he found was far more horrific than he had anticipated. Upon arrival, he discovered Meredith lying face down on her kitchen floor. Around her head was a pool of blood. Nearby, he also found Jen Eyre's lifeless body on the floor. Mark shouted in shock and ran to Meredith. He said, "Baby, oh baby, what have you done?" Meredith had excitedly posted on her Instagram about her new job at Villanova less than 2 hours before she died, expressing her excitement. According to Meredith's 5:42 p.m. post, after just 1 week on the job, she's already earned the love of fans at NOA Nation. Later that evening, she arrived at her home on Lowry Lane in Radnor Township, parked her Audi in the driveway, opened the door, and walked inside, unaware that Jen Eyre had broken in and was hiding, waiting to attack her. When Mark got there, Tim, one of Meredith's neighbors, was present. He mentioned that he heard a commotion and went out to see what happened. Mark asked him to call 911. Sergeant Christopher Furr of the Radnor Township Police Department said the call made his heart sink. Sergeant Christopher said they don't usually get calls like this. When they arrived, the scene was chaotic with a lot of police present. Mark, who appeared out of breath according to Christopher, was put in an ambulance before being taken to the police station as a suspect. After questioning Mark and discovering that the gun used in the 2 deaths was under Jen Eyre's body, the police concluded that Jen Eyre had broken into Meredith's home, killed her, and then committed suicide. The police received a tip from witness, who claimed to see a woman in a trench coat, hat, sunglasses, and possibly a wig watching the house with binoculars. They also found a set of car keys at the crime scene that were traced to a Cadillac rented by Jen Eyre. Mark was surprised to learn about the Cadillac. He said he learned most of this from the police and the news. Jen Eyre had rented the car 2 weeks before the incident, and it was parked just outside their apartment. Mark continued his investigation by examining his wife's bank statements, phone records, and computer backups, discovering that she was leading a double life. After Mark confessed to his affair shortly after Valentine's Day, he found out that Jen Eyre had opened a secret bank account and credit cards. She used these cards to buy audio surveillance equipment, a lock-picking kit, computer hacking software, and DNA testing kits for his clothes. Mark also revealed that she purchased advanced GPS tracking devices and attached them to both his and Meredith's cars. Mark stated that he had found over 400 images of private conversations between Meredith and him from text and Snapchat, and that Jen Eyre would access his phone in the middle of the night. On March 20, 2018, 5 weeks before committing the murder, Jen Eyre bought the gun she used in the murder and suicide. Her credit card statements showed that she practiced shooting the gun 3 times at a firing range. Mark claimed that Jen Eyre had secretly placed several recording devices in his clothes. He discovered files containing hundreds of hours of audio recordings his wife had not only recorded but also transcribed into notebooks. According to Mark, Jen Eyre had taken all his jackets and embedded multiple devices, constantly switching them in and out. Every day, she would remove a device, download the recorded content, and then sew it back into his jacket, repeating this process for weeks. It was revealed that on the night Jen Eyre killed Meredith and herself, she emailed a letter to her family, chillingly explaining her motive. She had begun the letter weeks prior, dating her entries, and described how it was an act of revenge for what he had done to her, saying, "That's as simple as it gets." Dr. Robbie Ludwig, a psychotherapist who studied marriage-related homicides and Red Letter, suggested that Jen Eyre may have been driven to kill Meredith and herself because she could not bear losing Mark. Dr. Robin commented that, in his opinion, there was something about listening to the recordings that made Jen Eyre angry and upset. Dr. Robin went on to say that Jen Eyre found the strength to act because she believed that her suspicions about her husband's character were correct. However, when she became suicidal and lost hope in life, she became more dangerous. It seemed that she had arranged everything to make her husband suffer. In a TV interview with Dr. Ozark, Mark shared a shocking revelation. Jen Eyre had written a 15-page letter, confessing that if he had walked in on the crime scene, she would have killed him as well. He acknowledged that he had hurt Jen Eyre, and his greatest regret was making her feel trapped and without options. He deeply wished he could travel back in time and erase the hurt he had caused. He confessed that his love for Jen Eyre had remained strong and never disappeared. Mark explained that he drove by Meredith's house multiple times as a way to cope with his emotions and come to terms with what had happened, helping him to process his feelings and move on. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Georgia Williams. Georgia Williams was born on September 17, 1995, in Telford, Shropshire, England. She grew up in a close and loving family with her parents, Lynette and Steve Williams, and her older sister Scarlett. From an early age, Georgia demonstrated a kind and thoughtful nature, consistently looking for ways to help others and make those around her happy. This admirable quality eventually becomes her weakness. Despite being bullied in middle school, but Georgia's life improved in high school. She made a group of friends and became a well-liked and popular student. Her kind nature and good leadership skills helped her win the position of class monitor. She pursued her passion for helping others by joining the Air Cadets Corps, with the ultimate goal of becoming a medical officer in the Royal Air Force. At 17, Georgia started working at a local gas station, where she quickly became friends with her co-workers. One of them was Jamie Reynolds, a 22-year-old man who seemed quiet and isolated from the rest of the group. Georgia, being a kind and caring person, reached out to Jamie in friendship, wanting to help him feel less alone. Thanks to her efforts, Jamie started to fit in at work, participating in group activities and making friends with his co-workers. As time went on, Jamie developed strong feelings for Georgia, seeing her as the only person who had shown him kindness and believed in him. Feeling hopeful, Jamie started to think that maybe Georgia felt the same way about him. Emboldened by his newfound confidence, He mustered the nerve to express his true feelings to Georgia and inquired if she would be open of a romantic relationship. However, Georgia, being considerate of Jamie's feelings, let him down gently. She explained that she didn't want to ruin their friendship by getting romantically involved. Jamie seems to respect Georgia's choice and tries to maintain their friendship. However, he is actually harboring an increasingly unhealthy obsession with her. One day, while they were working together at the gas station, Jamie opened up to Georgia about his unhappiness with his life. He told her that he wanted to quit his job and pursue his true passions. Jamie had always dreamed of turning his passions into a career, and Georgia was eager to support him. One day, they started talking about his hobbies, and Jamie revealed his love for photography. Georgia saw an opportunity and encouraged Jamie to pursue it as a career. Excited about the idea, Jamie asked Georgia to help him create a professional portfolio and asked if she would be his first model. Georgia, being a good friend, agreed to help. They scheduled a photo shoot for Sunday, May 26, 2013, at Jamie's parents' house, with a few mutual friends joining in. However, as the day approached, Georgia found herself in a difficult situation. Her family was hosting a barbecue, and her grandparents, whom she hadn't seen in a long time, would be attending. Georgia thought about canceling the photo shoot at the last minute, but she didn't want to let Jamie down. She decided to keep her commitment and assured her family that she would only be a short drive away. She planned to quickly take a few photos and then return to her family's barbecue, hoping to make both her friend and family happy. On that day, Georgia got ready quickly, doing her hair and makeup, and wearing jeans and a leather jacket. Her father complimented her as she left home at 7:30 p.m., saying she looked beautiful, like Sandy from Greece. Georgia's family expected her to return home soon. However, as the hours went by and she didn't come home, her loved ones started to worry. At first, her mother wasn't too concerned, thinking Georgia was probably just busy with the photo shoot or spending time with friends. She sent a text asking when the photo shoot would end. Georgia replied, saying it had already ended and that she was with friends and might be home late. Her mother wasn't worried after getting the text, as it seemed like a typical message from Georgia, with the usual 3 kissy face emojis at the end. Georgia's mother trusted her to be responsible, which is why she wasn't worried at first. As the night went on, Georgia's parents went to bed, thinking she would be home by morning. However, when they woke up the next day and Georgia still hadn't returned, they started to feel uneasy. Georgia's mother sent her a text message at 6:30 a.m. asking where she was. But it wasn't until 7:30 a.m. that a response arrived, saying George had spent the night at a friend's house and her phone battery was running out. The message said that if George didn't respond again, it was because her phone had died. George's mother was unaware that the messages were not written by her daughter. On May 27th, Georgia's parents thought she would come home after a music festival. They expected her to come home the next morning because she was excited about her first driving lesson. As the night went on and George didn't come home, her parents became more and more anxious. They stayed up late waiting for her, but there was no sign of her. They contacted relatives and friends to see if anyone had heard from George, but no one had seen or heard from her in days. This makes them even more insecure and unsure of what is going on. When Georgia failed to return home the next morning for her scheduled driving lesson, her family quickly reported her missing to the police. They gave the police all the information they had, but they only knew that Georgia had been to a photo shoot at Jamie Reynolds' home and nothing about her whereabouts after that. The police started investigating and focused on Jamie Reynolds. What they found out about him was alarming and raised concerns for Georgia's safety. It turns out that in 2008, Jamie got into trouble with the law for assaulting and attempting to strangle a teenager. Despite the seriousness of the incident, he was let off with a warning and not charged. When the police discovered this, they suspected Jamie even more and considered him the main suspect in George's disappearance. They went to his home, but no one answered. They broke in. They searched the premises but couldn't find Jamie, so prompting a large-scale manhunt to track him down. After conducting a thorough investigation at the petrol station, it was clear that none of Jamie and George's co-workers had seen them. Their absence from work was unusual and raised concerns, as it was out of character for both of them. Although Jamie's parents were away on vacation, but they had already given the authorities key details about Jamie's van, such as its registration information. The police in Shropshire quickly shared this information with police agencies nationwide, asking them to be on the lookout for the van. Soon, authorities located Jamie in Glasgow, Scotland, which is 428 miles away from his home. His abrupt departure from the country, which came without warning, raised concerns and hinted at a potential problem. On May 30th, police in Glasgow arrested Jamie Reynolds at a local hotel due to suspicions of kidnapping Georgia. They immediately questioned him about Georgia's location, but Jamie claimed he didn't know where she was and provided no useful information to the investigators. He was then taken to Shropshire for more questioning. Meanwhile, Georgia's family and friends waited nervously for news, but what they heard about the investigation was deeply upsetting. The lack of progress was crushing, making their pain even worse. With Jamie in custody as the main suspect, the police searched his home for evidence. During the search, they found a camera with an SD card, but their hopes of finding important clues were crushed when they discovered that all the files had been deleted. The camera was sent to the police station for forensic analysis, where experts worked to recover the deleted files. Eventually, they managed to retrieve the data, revealed a shocking secret to the investigation. Among the recovered files are several images taken on the day Georgia went missing, providing a haunting look at she's final moments. The initial photos showed Georgia in normal poses at the start of the photo shoot, confirming she was at Jamie's residence that day. Although she appeared content and cooperative, it was clear Georgia had no idea about Jamie's sinister intentions. Sadly, she unintentionally entered a hazardous situation without realizing the risks, which ultimately led to her tragic death. As authorities went through the images, the tone became increasingly dark and unsettling. Subsequent photos reveal a series of harrowing incidents, depicting a distressed Georgia stripped of her clothes, standing weakly on a red recycling bin. Her hands appeared to be tied behind her back with a rope hanging ominously above her. The footage captured Jamie Reynolds' horrific act. He filmed Georgia's final moments, showing her desperate struggle for breath. He later committed heinous acts of necrophilia, violating her lifeless body in various rooms of the house. Jamie's parents' bed was where he further compounded the horror. He took hundreds of additional photos showing Georgia in degrading positions, documenting his depravity. He stripped her of her jewelry, keeping them as trophies of his horrific crime. The police conducted a thorough search of Jamie's home and found a large collection of explicit photographs and videos, including content that depicted extreme violence, sexual assault, and murder. It was discovered that Jamie was not only in possession of these materials, but also actively involved in creating content that featured violent acts. Jamie's parents were alerted to their son's disturbing interests and immediately ended their vacation to meet with authorities. They revealed that Jamie had been exposed to violent and explicit content from the age of 14. It is possible that he was exposed to such content even earlier. Although his parents tried to intervene by blocking access to certain websites, Jamie found a way to circumvent their efforts. At the age of 14, he contacted the internet provider and set up his own private Wi-Fi connection, which allowed him to continue accessing the blocked websites without his parents' knowledge. When Jamie's parents first found out he was watching these videos, they became worried and contacted the police and Child Protective Services. However, the authorities said they couldn't take any action because watching such content wasn't against the law. As the police looked into the matter further, they found a set of notebooks containing 40 separate stories written by Jamie. These stories were centered around harming, sexually assaulting, and murdering women. Additionally, investigators discovered that Jamie had searched social media platforms, printed and marked images of young girls with nooses around their necks. One of the stories, titled "Georgia Williams Surprised," has a very similar plot to the incidents that led to Georgia's death. Authorities believe this narrative may have been a pre-planned scenario, intended to be carried out from the start. Jamie began writing this narrative in January and finished it just 3 weeks before the murder. Despite being questioned, Jamie refused to reveal the location of Georgia's body, insisting he was innocent. As a result, investigators had to painstakingly reconstruct Jamie's movements from the Monday morning after Georgia's murder. They started by reviewing surveillance footage of Jamie refueling his vehicle at a petrol station. Unbeknownst to them at the time, Georgia's body was hidden in the back of Jamie's van. After refueling, Jamie drove 60 miles to a movie theater, leaving Georgia's body in the van parked in the theater's lot. He then went inside to watch a movie. However, police lost track of Jamie after he left the theater and issued a public appeal for help finding him. The appeal was successful, with people reporting sightings of Jamie's van near the New York G Mountain Pass. The area, with its dense woods and muddy terrain, was where Jamie tried to evade capture. Locals remembered Jamie in his van, especially after it got stuck in the mud and Good Samaritans helped him get it out. Police followed up on this lead and searched the wooded area where Jamie was spotted. Unfortunately, they found Georgia's naked body in this secluded spot. Georgia's body was returned to Shropshire after being recovered. A post-mortem examination revealed she died from asphyxiation due to a ligature around her neck. Forensic analysis also showed bruising on her back, indicating Jamie had used his knee to press her down. Initially, Jamie denied any involvement in Georgia's murder, but on the first day of his trial in December 2013, he suddenly stood up and pleaded guilty to all charges. During the trial, Georgia's father gave a heartfelt address to the court. They had to endure the pain for a long time as they witnessed their daughter's body lying motionless in the hospital's rest house, a traumatic experience that haunted both him and his wife. The trial also uncovered Jamie's previous run-ins with the law. In 2008, he received a warning from a judge for keeping a 1-year-old girl captive in his home. A disturbing incident foreshadowing Georgia's tragic death. In 2011, Jamie was criticized for recklessly backing his car into a girl's vehicle. This incident occurred after the girl had turned down his romantic advances. Although the case was eventually closed, Judge Mr. Justice Wilkie expressed serious concerns about Jamie's behavior, calling him a sexual deviant and warning about his potential to become a dangerous serial offender. As a result, Jamie received a whole life term, a sentence typically reserved for the most severe crimes, meaning he would spend the rest of his life in prison without parole. At the time, Jamie was the 46th person to receive this sentence and the youngest person in history to be given a whole life term. During sentencing, Judge Justice Wilkie highlighted the extreme suffering Georgia endured, emphasizing the torturous nature of her experience. Jamie's obsession with violent and sadistic pornography had led to a horrific display of control over his victim, ultimately resulting in her tragic death. Jamie Reynolds hung his head in shame as Georgia's parents and sister listened to the disturbing details of her death and the abuse she suffered at his hands. The courtroom was extremely tense as the jury saw gruesome images of Georgia's final moments, causing her family to leave in distress. In 2014, Jamie tried to appeal his life sentence but was unsuccessful. A review of the case the following year criticized police officers, children's services, and mental health professionals for their handling of Jamie before Georgia's murder. The review found that these agencies failed to work together properly, despite Jamie having come to the attention of law enforcement 5 years earlier for attempting to strangle another girl. Georgia's parents were deeply saddened by the report, regretting the missed chances to intervene and prevent their daughter's death. They stated that they cried when they read about the agency's failures, as it was clear that Jamie was likely to commit murder. They believed that Georgia's death could have been prevented. Outside the courtroom, Georgia's father shared the family's overwhelming sadness, stating that no sentence could ever satisfy them because it wouldn't bring Georgia back to life. He emphasized that their loss was irreparable and that Jamie, despite his lengthy prison sentence, still had the one thing he took from their daughter, life. He noted that what to cause them grief is that Jamie, even while serving a life sentence, still gets to live. Jamie Reynolds remains in prison to this day. Georgia's mother, Lynette, later wrote a book titled Our Georgia, in which she shared the family's traumatic experiences. The book highlights the failures of the legal system that allowed Jamie, a violent film enthusiast, to remain at large and eventually commit murder. This book is a heartfelt tribute to Georgia and provides an insight into the devastating aftermath of her tragic passing. Georgia's death caused immense pain to those who loved her, leaving a huge gap that can never be filled. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of the Foster family. Christopher Foster had always been considered a success. His mother, Enid, described him as someone who actively pursued financial opportunities from an early age. Along with his younger brother, Andrew, he aspired to follow in the footsteps of their late father, who had been a sales manager. Although they both aimed to become successful businessmen, Chris and Andrew had had a tense relationship since they were children. Andrew later explained that Chris's confidence and assertiveness had overshadowed Andrew's quiet nature. Despite this, both brothers were very close to their mother, Enid. In 1987, Chris married Jill, a housewife, and they had their daughter Kirsty in 1993. Chris's path to wealth began in the late 80s when he worked as a mattress salesman and used inexpensive pizza boxes for insulation. His life changed dramatically after he founded a successful engineering company. This business made Chris a self-made millionaire through the development of an innovative insulation material that became essential in the oil industry. The Piper Alpha oil rig explosion on July 6, 1988, had led to a catastrophic fire that lasted for days and claimed the lives of 167 people. After watching the news, Chris saw an opportunity in this tragedy and identified a market niche for fireproof insulation specifically for oil and gas rigs. Although many oil companies showed interest, they wanted certification of the product's effectiveness before signing a contract. To prove its value, Chris took the financial risk of mortgaging his house to fund an experiment. The test was successful. His product, Overshield, showed exceptional resilience compared to other insulation materials when exposed to fire. It even received a rare A1 fire test rating. Major oil companies quickly placed orders, making Christopher Foster a millionaire almost overnight. Reports suggested that he earned so much money that he didn't know how to spend it all. As his business grew, Christopher's annual turnover increased significantly from £50,000 to £1 million. By 2004, Chris's net worth had been reported to be £10 million. That same year, his wife Jill noticed a house in Shropshire Life magazine. It was Usbaston House, a beautiful mansion in Maesbrook, a wealthy village in Shropshire, England. The estate was 16 acres in size, had its own lake and equestrian grounds. Despite being offered at around £1.5 million, the house still needed repairs. Jill was so intrigued that Chris made an offer the next morning. Foster's family quickly sold their house and moved to Usbaston House. Chris then invested a further £50,000 to install a swimming pool and landscape the property. After settling down, Chris led a lavish lifestyle. He bought 2 Porsches, one for himself and one for Jill, a James Bond-style Aston Martin, Range Rovers, and many other vehicles. Their daughter Kirsty attended a private boarding school and Chris also bought her several horses. Kirsty spent time with her horses when not at school and participated in equestrian competitions. Friends described her as quiet, thoughtful, and kind. In addition, Chris also bought 4 dogs and several pigeons. He further enhanced their lives by hiring a butler and a personal assistant, and the house had antique furniture worth more than £200,000. Chris's most expensive hobby was his passion for shooting, demonstrated by his expensive gun collection, each costing between £12,000 and £12,500, equivalent to nearly $20,000 at the time. Chris often attended shooting parties that could last 3 days, with bills running up to £8,000. He had a habit of leaving guns around the house. Occasionally, when pigeons made a mess of Chris's car, he would shoot them, much to Jill's frustration. In one disturbing incident, when Kirsty's black Labrador began disturbing the sheep, Chris was unable to control the dog and led it down a country road to shoot it in the head. Chris was a successful businessman but lacked a long-term vision. Notoriously impulsive, he craved instant gratification and was quick to cut ties with people who annoyed him. Chris enjoyed being admired and envied by others for his wealth, and social status was very important to him. Over time, both Chris and Jill moved up the social ladder, and it became clear to those close to Chris that he wanted to move away from his roots in Wolverhampton. Jill enjoyed shopping sprees and spent her days doing self-care activities like nail and hair appointments, along with beauty treatments like manicures and Botox injections. Chris and his family regularly went on luxury vacations, staying in luxury hotels and enjoying the best food. These lavish trips could sometimes cost up to £20,000 each, and Chris didn't hesitate to pay. However, unbeknownst to his friends and family, Chris had reached his financial limit and began withdrawing money from his business. His excessive spending had led to financial imbalance, with more money going out than coming in. In 2003, Chris had signed an exclusive contract with DRC, giving them the exclusive rights to produce his oil rig sealant. By 2004, his net worth had been reported to be £1 million. However, by 2005, he owed £2.8 million. Instead of cutting costs, Chris, due to his lavish spending habits, sought more money from other sources. Despite the exclusive agreement with DRC, he signed another contract with another company to sell his products. DRC discovered this infringement and sued Chris, resulting in a lawsuit and DRC acquiring Chris's patent. Chris went bankrupt, and in 2007, his company was dissolved. His assets worth £3 million were frozen and his salary was gone. Despite serious financial troubles, Chris continued to act as if nothing significant had happened. At the same time, Chris became involved in a dispute with his accountant, who reported him to the Inland Revenue for tax evasion. Chris had failed to pay VAT, national insurance, and various other taxes. To deal with his increasing tax obligations, he had to borrow from banks to ease his financial strain. In addition, he had mortgaged the Usbaston house 3 times and withdrawn money from more than 20 different bank accounts. Despite his lavish lifestyle and constant spending, Chris still tried to hide the fact that he was deeply in debt. Chris gradually found himself struggling with overwhelming challenges, aware that time was ticking away and fearful of losing everything. However, during a conversation with a friend about houses, Chris insisted that he would never sell Usbaston house. Struggling with the pressure to maintain his flashy and knowing that his time and money were running out, Chris repeatedly sought professional help. He confided in the doctor, revealing his feelings of depression and suicidal thoughts. He started taking antidepressants. In August 2008, Chris came across a letter from his house managers posted on the front gate. The letter reported that they planned to return the following Tuesday to reclaim the house and other assets. The housekeeper said that when she showed Chris the letter, Chris appeared confused but remained silent. The nightmare that Chris had been avoiding had now become a harsh reality. He was on the brink of losing all his material possessions. The thought of Kirsty and Jill losing their familiar lifestyle was unbearable for Christopher. His family faced the possibility of returning to Wolverhampton, saying goodbye to their lavish lifestyle. For a proud man like Chris, such a situation would have been extremely humiliating. On August 21, 2008, a friend contacted Chris via text message to ask about his health, and he replied, "Not good, things are about to happen to me." On August 25, 2008, the Foster's family received an invitation to a barbecue and clay pigeon shooting event. They then joined the gathering. None of the attendees noticed any signs of difficulty in the Fosters. Witnesses recalled that Chris appeared happy. Their family still exuded happiness without knowing what Chris had planned that night. Chris informed Jill that he wanted to leave the gathering. Although Jill wanted to stay a little longer, they eventually left around 8:30 p.m., arriving home just a few minutes later at 8:44 p.m., their route captured by home security footage. Soon after, Jill went to bed. At 11:30 p.m., Chris went upstairs to check on Kirsty, urging her to go to bed while continuing to text a friend online. Around midnight, Chris decided to turn off the internet, causing Kirsty to end her conversation with her friend and go to bed. At 3 a.m., Chris began his violent rampage. He entered Jill's room and used a silencer to shoot her in the head while she was sleeping. Next, he went to Kirsty's room and killed her in the same way. Home security cameras recorded Chris's actions as he carried a shotgun outside the dog cage, killing each dog with a shot to the head. He then went to the stables and killed the horses before burning the stables with the animals inside. Chris appeared expressionless in the video. To prevent firefighters from reaching the house, Chris blocked the main entrance, shooting at the tires to make movement more difficult. He also pumped 200 liters of oil from the family's tank into the house's basement through connecting pipes. It is clear that Chris took deliberate steps to completely destroy the Osbaston house. His actions appeared to have been motivated by a desire to prevent others from acquiring property that he could not keep. Chris burned down his house and covered his car and belongings in oil. The fire quickly spread and destroyed everything. Chris, still carrying a rifle, went back into the house and lay down next to Jill's body in the bedroom, holding her as flames engulfed them. At 4:11 a.m., the security cameras stopped working. A neighbor saw the growing fire and called for help. Firefighters quickly arrived. The fire was too intense and difficult to control. As firefighters tried to put out the fire, neighbors watched the building burn, worried for those inside. In the following days, the media called in to search for Foster's family, but all efforts were unsuccessful. Because of Chris's wealth, the authorities opened an investigation, initially suspecting that the Foster family had been kidnapped. However, at the time, neither the bodies nor the security footage were found, so many speculated about what might have happened to them. It took 3 days for the fire to be completely extinguished. After the fire was extinguished, investigators carefully examined the house and found the bodies of Jill and Christopher on beds in a room that had collapsed into the living room. However, there was no sign of Kirsty. While some hoped she could have escaped, others feared she had been kidnapped. Sadly, Kirsty's remains were found in the rubble a few days later. Investigators used a brush to carefully collect her remains into a hearse. A fragment of Kirsty's skull revealed that she had suffered a gunshot wound to the head, like her mother. After examining the body, the police began to suspect that Chris had committed a crime. At the same time, they began investigating his financial situation. When they dug deeper, they discovered that Chris, a seemingly successful businessman, was actually heavily in debt. His total debt had reached £4 million, and when creditors tried to take his assets, they discovered that Chris had intended to demolish the house to ensure that there was nothing left for them to take. Security footage confirmed the police's suspicions. Chris committed the murders and took his own life without leaving any explanation or warning. Speculation about the motives behind the brutal crime led to two main theories. One theory had suggested that Chris, feeling ashamed of having lost his fortune, chose to commit the heinous act to avoid admitting his failures. Another theory had proposed that Chris, being self-centered, decided to destroy everything rather than face the possibility of loss. However, Enid had disagreed with these theories. She had firmly believed that Chris acted out of love for his family, trying to protect them from financial ruin. She had defended him and felt a deep sense of sympathy for his situation. In contrast, Chris's brother Andrew had held a very different view. Despite not speaking for 16 years, Andrew had briefly considered reconciling with Chris for their mother's sake. However, his fear of a hostile encounter had kept him from reaching out. Andrew had alleged that Chris had bullied and sexually assaulted him during their childhood, leading to a tumultuous relationship. Andrew had maintained that Chris exhibited bullying and controlling behavior. Andrew's attempts to reconcile with Chris in 1999 had been met with resistance. Chris had responded to Andrew's letter with a demand for a written apology, stating that Andrew would have to beg and scrape on bended knee to make amends. Andrew had believed that Chris refused to acknowledge his past wrongdoings and instead held on to long-standing grudges. For months after the tragedy, on December 19, 2008, a joint funeral had been held for 15-year-old Kirsty and 49-year-old Jill at their local village church. The service had been quiet and respectful, attended by close friends and family. Both Kirsty and Jill had been buried in the same plot, as requested by Jill's family. Chris had received a private funeral and was buried elsewhere. In the years following the tragedy, the remains of the burnt-out house and the family's charred belongings had been left on the site. These had included Kirsty's first aid book for her horses and a handwritten note detailing the family's meal plans for the week of the tragedy. The ruins of the house had remained until 2011 when the debris had been cleared. The 16-acre estate had been sold in 2014, with plans to build a new 6-bedroom house. Although the property had been put up for sale in 2012, it had taken 2 years to sell, reportedly after the price had been reduced. The reasons behind Christopher Foster's actions may have been financial struggles and the pressure to maintain a wealthy image. However, this had not justified the horrific outcome. Instead of having made sensible financial decisions or confiding in his loved ones, Chris had chosen a destructive path that had had devastating consequences for everyone involved. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Vincent Brothers. Vincent Brothers was born on May 30, 1962, in Long Island, New York. From a young age, he was known for his charisma, reliability, and diligence. He also served in the Marine Corps Reserves. After graduating from Norfolk State University, Vincent moved to California in the mid-1980s to pursue further education and eventually earned a master's degree. Despite having a successful career as a school administrator, Vincent's personal life was marred by tumultuous relationships. His 2 previous marriages ended in divorce. In 1988, while working at California State University in Bakersfield, Vincent had a daughter with his girlfriend. He took his girlfriend to court to establish paternity and was eventually awarded custody and visitation rights. Initially required to pay $350 per month in child support, this amount was increased to $771 in 2003. That same year, Vincent was convicted of wife abuse and received a 6-day jail sentence and probation. In 1992, Vincent married for the second time, but this marriage also ended in divorce in 1996 due to accusations of intimidation and physical abuse by his second wife. While serving as the assistant principal at Emerson High School, Vincent was accused of sexually harassing a colleague. The woman claimed that Vincent assaulted her at his home and took her phone to prevent her from calling the police. When she tried to report the incident to the police, she said police discouraged her from pursuing charges because she was afraid of Vincent's reputation. The harassment continued at school, with Vincent allegedly touching her inappropriately. The woman eventually resigned from her job as a teacher, citing an unfriendly work environment. The school district investigated Vincent due to his increasingly threatening behavior and threatening phone calls. Despite Vincent denying the allegations and having no disciplinary record, the school district transferred him to another school as a precaution. Vincent then began working at John C. Fremont Elementary School in Bakersfield, California, where he also became famous and respected. Vincent was especially known for ensuring the safety of students by taking them home after school. While teaching at Fremont Elementary School, Vincent met Joni Harper, the school's security supervisor and basketball manager. Vincent and Joni began dating and eventually married after the birth of their first child, Marcus. Their family grew with the arrival of their second child, Lindsay, in 2000. However, Vincent's infidelity caused him and Joni to divorce in September 2001. 2 years later, Vincent and Joni remarried in secret, and their third child, Marshall, was born 4 months later. Joni eventually opened up to her friends about the problems in her marriage. Unlike before, she expressed her fear that Vincent might harm her. However, to those around them, Vincent's family appeared happy and actively involved in the community, often attending local events and maintaining good relationships with others. From the outside, Joni and Vincent's marriage seemed stable. Joni continued to work as a basketball manager, pursuing her passion. However, no one expected that the tragic events hidden behind the family's happy exterior would soon emerge. 3 months before the tragic event, Vincent had moved out of the house due to frequent arguments with his mother-in-law, Ernestine. On July 6, 2003, Joni attended a church service with her 3 children, Marcus, Lindsay, and 6-week-old Marshall, as well as her mother, Ernestine. The family had lunch at Black Angus after the ceremony, then returned home for a nap. As was their custom, Joni and the children stayed in one bedroom, while Ernestine stayed in another room in the house. Tragically, the family was attacked in their home. The killer easily entered the house without signs of forced entry and shot Joni twice in the head while she was in the bedroom. Lindsay was also shot in the back. The noise alerted Ernestine, causing her to quickly arm herself with a .38 revolver and move toward the hallway to investigate. Unfortunately, she was killed before she could defend herself. The attacker shot Ernestine twice in the face, causing her to collapse in the hallway outside her bedroom. The attacker then entered the room and shot Marcus, followed by a fatal shot to the baby's back. Each shot was aimed very carefully. Instead of fleeing the scene immediately, the attacker went to the kitchen to get a knife and then returned to the bedroom. There, the attacker stabbed the victims multiple times in the back. On July 8, 2003, Kelsey Spann, Joni's best friend, became worried when she had not heard from Joni, Ernestine, and Joni's children since they went to church the previous Sunday. Kelsey decided to go to Joni's house to check on them using the key Joni had given her. When she tried to unlock the door, she found it difficult to open due to an obstacle. She then went to the back of the house and found an unlocked sliding glass door, which was unusual. Upon entering the house, Kelsey discovered Joni, her mother Ernestine, and Marcus, Lindsay, and Marshall, all dead. Kelsey immediately contacted authorities at 7 a.m. They arrived at the scene and discovered 5 family members brutally murdered. The family's peaceful home, located in a quiet neighborhood, became the scene of a horrific crime. The police investigation concluded that the family had been tragically killed on Sunday afternoon as they returned from church. Before leaving the scene, the perpetrator covered the bodies in the bedroom with blankets and pillows taken from other rooms. Detectives identified Joni as the primary target due to the severity of her injuries, suggesting the attacker had been extremely angry. Police were concerned about Vincent's safety and discovered he had been in Ohio. Detective Watts traveled to North Carolina, where Vincent was visiting his mother with his brother Melvin. When North Carolina police met with Vincent, they found him severely traumatized and unable to speak coherently, which did not provide many details about the investigation. Vincent's behavior was inconsistent with that of a murderer, and because he had been on the other side of the country when the murder occurred, police initially ruled him out as a suspect. He also provided receipts showing purchases made around the time of the tragedy, confirming that he had not been in Bakersfield, California, where the incident occurred. However, Detective Watts still doubted Vincent's innocence. Notably, Vincent never asked how his wife and children had died, which aroused suspicion. On July 11, 2003, Vincent had returned to Los Angeles without attending their family's memorial service, but Vincent had attended their funeral 5 days later. As the investigation continued, it was discovered that Vincent had moved out of his family home in April 2003. Additionally, his wife, Joni, had been planning to divorce him again and had sought child support. Authorities also discovered that Vincent had had a history of violence against women, which had led them to take a closer look at his alibi. Upon further investigation, surveillance video from the store's checkout counters had shown that Melvin, not Vincent, had made the purchase at that time. When confronted, Melvin revealed that Vincent had told him to make these purchases in Vincent's name. Despite their efforts, police were unable to find any witnesses who had seen Vincent between the evening of July 4th and the evening of July 7th. Both Melvin and his family insisted they had not seen Vincent during this time. Although there was no direct evidence linking Vincent to the murder, police discovered he had some suspicious activities. Vincent had rented a car when he had arrived in Columbus, Ohio, and he had stayed at his brother's house. Police suspected Vincent had flown to Columbus on July 2, 2003 to visit family, then returned to Bakersfield on July 4, where the tragic incident had occurred on July 6. He was supposed to return to Ohio on July 7 and had arrived late that evening. Law enforcement had conducted a thorough inspection of the Dodge vehicle, paying special attention to its radiator and air filter. To help identify insects found in the car, investigators had enlisted the expertise of Dr. Lynn Kimsey from the Bohart Museum of Entomology at the University of California, Davis. Dr. Kimsey carefully had analyzed the insects and identified more than 100 species, including several species found only in the western region beyond the Rocky Mountains. The presence of some insects suggested that Vincent had moved at night. By carefully analyzing the insects, Dr. Kimsey had been able to plot a path that showed the car had traveled west from Ohio. Investigators later had tracked down the 5 previous car renters and confirmed that none of them had driven the car to California or near the Rocky Mountains. Police also had examined photographic evidence and found the end of a rubber glove in the laundry room. DNA testing showed a match. It belonged to none other than Vincent Brothers. Detective Watts had discovered that Vincent had been planning to leave town and had begun selling his assets, including putting his house on the market. As a result, Vincent had been arrested on April 30, 2004 and charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder. The trial began in 2007, with prosecutor Lisa Green leading the case. The prosecution argued that Vincent's motive for the murder had been financial, suggesting he had acted out of fear of having to pay child support due to his impending divorce from Joni. The prosecution portrayed Vincent as a serial adulterer who often had disappeared for long periods of time and who could become violent. To support their case, the prosecution called several witnesses, including Dr. Lynn Kimsey, who testified that the insects found in the Dodge were consistent with insects commonly found along Interstate 70. This testimony was further supported by evidence showing 5,424 miles had been driven from July 2 to July 11 in accordance with the prosecution's statement. However, when Melvin had appeared in court, he tried to change his previous testimony, claiming that he had lied to the police about Vincent giving him a credit card to use. In response, the defense presented an expert on high-speed driving, who argued that maintaining an average speed of 70 miles per hour during the trip from Ohio to California had been extremely difficult. The defense also presented its pathologists, who testified that the murders could have occurred as late as Monday morning, July 7, 2003. The defense also had presented interrogation tapes to prove that Melvin had been pressured by police to change his statement. Additionally, they called a witness who claimed to have seen a car accident involving Vincent on Sunday morning, in which a boy on a bicycle had collided with Vincent's rental car at an intersection. Although the incident had not been reported to the police due to the lack of damage or injuries, the prosecution attempted to verify the story. Vincent had taken it upon himself to defend himself. He had strongly denied all accusations about his married life and had firmly denied the accusation of murdering his family. Throughout his testimony, Vincent had become emotional and had shed tears several times. The prosecution had called Carla Tuya, principal of Franklin School, as a witness. She had testified about her past relationship with Vincent, which had begun in 1996 when his son was born and had ended in 2002 when she had decided to end it. Carla revealed a shocking secret that she and Vincent had been intimate just weeks before the family tragedy, directly contradicting Vincent's previous denials about everything. This admission had damaged Vincent's claim to fidelity to his family. The prosecution had argued that the crime had been carefully planned in advance. Thanks to knowing the family's Sunday habits, the murderer had gained an advantage and had had the opportunity to strike. The perpetrator had taken advantage of this and had waited until the whole family was asleep, then had used the spare key to enter the house through the sliding glass door and had killed each family member. On May 15, 2017, Vincent had been found guilty of 5 counts of first-degree murder, making him eligible for the death penalty. The jury had reached this decision after hearing testimony from 137 witnesses and deliberating for nearly 2 days. After the verdict, Vincent had been removed from the courtroom and had been returned to the Luro detention facility under tight security. Then, on September 27, 2007, Durr County Superior Court Judge Michael Bush had sentenced Vincent Brothers to death by lethal injection. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Susan Wright. Susan Wright was born on April 24, 1976 in Houston, Texas. Her parents, Velma Sue and Jimmy Lawrence Wright, lived a simple life and raised Susan and her older sister, Cindy. From a young age, Susan was an active, friendly, and talented child. During her school years, she participated in dancing activities and aspired to become a professional choreographer. With her bright and attractive appearance, Susan had many fans. However, after graduating from high school, Susan's dream of becoming a student did not come true. But she did not give up, and after a short break, she saved money to continue her studies. For a long time, Susan worked as a dancer at a famous nightclub in the city. However, she soon realized that this job was not for her and decided to leave. She then used her savings to study nursing at night at a university. With the goal of becoming independent, Susan balanced her studies with a job as a waitress at a restaurant to support herself. However, after a while, Susan realized that a career in medicine was not the right path for her and paying for her tuition became difficult. Therefore, Susan decided to drop out of school and focus on her work. In 1997, Susan met Jeffrey Wright at the Galveston restaurant where she worked. She was 21 years old at the time and Jeffrey went to the restaurant for a meal. From then on, their romantic relationship began. Jeffrey was immediately attracted to the blue-eyed blonde's beauty and bright smile. He left a generous tip and became a regular customer. Finally, he mustered up the courage to ask for Susan's phone number. Susan recalls that Jeffrey began calling her every day, sometimes multiple times a day. Jeffrey arranged romantic dates and small surprises like sending flowers and touching notes to Susan's workplace. In the evenings, Jeffrey would meet her and take her home. Although Jeffrey was 8 years older than her, the age gap did not bother them. Jeffrey was attentive, sweet, and caring, and quickly won Susan's heart. However, Jeffrey had some problems with alcohol and substance abuse. Jeffrey said that he had given up drugs and promised to give up drinking completely. Susan, a naive young girl, believed him. Susan felt that together they could overcome any challenge. Shortly after Susan learned she was pregnant, she immediately shared the news with Jeffrey. Although Jeffrey initially expressed joy at the prospect of becoming a father, he had not made any decisions about the future. Jeffrey did not propose and they continued to live apart. Disturbed by Jeffrey's behavior, Susan insisted that their first child be born, and Jeffrey accepted her opinion. At the time of the marriage license, Susan was 8 months pregnant. Their wedding was a simple affair, with no guests or witnesses. A few weeks before the baby was due, they moved into a quiet house in Harris County, Texas. In December 1998, Susan gave birth to a son named Bradley. Just 3 years later, she was pregnant again. In the spring of 2002, she welcomed her second daughter, named Kay. Along the shore, the family also raised a small dog named Buck and had a spacious family car. Jeffrey worked for a local construction company, and after they had a daughter named Kay, Jeffrey agreed that Susan would stay home to care for the child. Friendly neighbors often praised Susan as a kind and caring mother. She created a cozy environment for the family. From the outside, it seemed like the perfect family. Every day, Susan has to spend a lot of time doing housework such as cleaning, organizing, cooking, and making sure everything is kept in a clean condition. Jeffrey does not want her to repeat the same recipes. The whole house has to be clean for Susan. Taking care of young children and cleaning the house at the same time can be considered impossible. Jeffrey's clothes have to be washed almost every day because he doesn't want to wear any of the same clothes again. However, following these rules manually is not easy. If Susan doesn't comply with his request, she will face insults, humiliation, and even physical abuse. Financially, Jeffrey is extremely frugal. Contrary to the image of a romantic man who often gives gifts and flowers, Jeffrey only gives Susan $100 a week to cover household expenses. At the same time, he also asked her to settle all expenses and provide receipts. Jeffrey also broke his earlier promise to quit drinking. However, the real problems were just beginning. Jeffrey relapsed and started using drugs again. Under the influence of these substances, Jeffrey would become aggressive and would hurt his wife and son. Whenever Susan asked Jeffrey to stop using drugs and go to rehab, Jeffrey responded with anger. Jeffrey saw no problem with his actions and believed that Susan knew about Jeffrey's drug and alcohol use before Susan married him, so she should accept it and live with it. Jeffrey's parents also knew their son's weakness and sympathized with Susan. However, they felt helpless and unable to help her. What Susan couldn't stand, however, was when her husband began to physically, emotionally, and even sexually abuse her. At first, he would apologize and promise not to do it again, but then he stopped apologizing and domestic violence became a daily occurrence. Jeffrey began boxing at the gym 3 times a week, finding that the sessions helped him relieve stress. On Monday, January 13, 2003, Jeffrey went to the gym after work as usual. When he returned home, he seemed stressed. While Susan was cooking dinner, Jeffrey decided to tell his son about the sport of boxing and teach him some basic techniques. While teaching his son boxing, Jeffrey lost control and hit the boy. The child burst into tears, and Jeffrey tried to comfort the child, hoping his wife wouldn't hear. Susan pretended not to notice, but this incident was the last straw for Susan. After dinner, Susan went to put the children to bed while Jeffrey remained in the bedroom. When Susan entered the room, Jeffrey attacked her violently. Susan thought that Jeffrey was trying to kill her with a knife. However, she reacted and realized that Jeffrey did not have a knife in his hand. Susan decided to use her dancing skills to seduce Jeffrey and lower his guard. Susan entered the room in a short silk robe and performed the dance for her husband. Susan then proposed a game, which Jeffrey agreed to participate in. In this game, Susan used 3 reins to tie Jeffrey's right hand and right leg to the bed. Jeffrey's left leg was secured with a silk strip from her robe. While Jeffrey was tied up, Susan used her panties to spank him, forming part of the intimate game. Susan gently turned off the lights. Jeffrey was now bound hand and foot, and a gag was stuffed into his mouth. The din candles were the only remaining light. Susan then moved the bubbling hot wax onto Jeffrey's chest. Susan then continued pouring the hot wax onto his genitals, and the pain quickly became unbearable. Jeffrey tried to free himself, tried to scream, but to no avail. Meanwhile, Susan continued to beat Jeffrey with a small, sharp knife she had taken from the kitchen. Susan started at the groin area, moving up and down, cutting Jeffrey's genitals, legs, stomach, chest, arms, neck, and face. At first, Susan moved slowly, complaining loudly with each slash, recounting the insults, humiliations, and abuse she had endured. Then Susan began to cry and stabbed faster and faster. Her actions showed that Susan was in a state of extreme despair and emotional turmoil. Susan could not stop even when Jeffrey showed no signs of life. Susan sat by the bed next to Jeffrey's body. However, after a few hours, Susan realized that the bedroom was covered in blood and she had to clean it up before morning. Susan carefully watched the window, making sure no neighbors were watching. At this point, Susan saw a hole in the backyard, which Jeffrey had dug over the weekend to build a fountain. Susan quickly moved Jeffrey's body from the bedroom to the yard, using a garden wheelbarrow to move it. Susan decided that the pool would be Jeffrey's final resting place. After calming down, Susan spent the rest of the day, before dawn, cleaning up the evidence of the attack. Susan had to wash the blood off the floors, walls, and carpets. The carpets had large stains that could not be removed. Susan added bleach to the stains, hoping that the chemicals would erase any traces of what had happened in the room. That morning, Susan called her husband's family in Austin, Texas, sobbing. Susan told them that her husband Jeffrey, while drinking and using drugs, had attacked Susan and their young son. Jeffrey then destroyed the house, spilling a bottle of bleach on the carpet before leaving, declaring that Jeffrey did not want to continue the marriage. When Jeffrey's parents heard that Jeffrey had been beating their son, they were shocked. They knew Jeffrey wasn't perfect, and they felt sorry for Susan. They offered to let Susan and the children stay at their house for a while, but Susan refused. Instead, Susan said she would file a police report and tell them everything that had happened in the family. Then, when Jeffrey suddenly went missing, Jeffrey's mother, Mrs. Wright, went to the police station to report the incident. Susan said Jeffrey had been violent towards Susan and the children. As a result, Susan had to file for a restraining order, which meant that Jeffrey would not be allowed near Susan and the children. When Susan filed for the restraining order, Susan presented evidence of her injuries, such as bruises and cuts on her arms. Susan said the injuries were caused by Jeffrey during a fight when he hit her with a key. Susan's children were also victims, especially Bradley, who was hit by his father and had minor bruises on his face. At first glance, the story told by Susan seemed plausible. Jeffrey, under the influence of alcohol and drugs, attacked Susan and her young son, after which Jeffrey became frightened and ran away. But over time, Jeffrey stopped communicating. And Jeffrey fled without taking his belongings, papers, and even his cell phone from home. Jeffrey did not go to work or to his parents' house, and none of his friends or neighbors saw Jeffrey. It was as if he had disappeared into thin air. Susan's situation is not optimistic as she finds it unbearable to be in the house where Susan murdered Jeffrey and buried his body in the yard. Susan begins to feel as if Jeffrey is still alive and about to rise from the grave to take revenge. Susan is on the verge of going crazy, and their dog Buck keeps barking and trying to dig up the burial site. On January 17th, after dropping her children off at school, Susan went to her mother Velma's house. Her mother learned about the incident and asked Susan, "You killed your husband, didn't you?" Susan burst into tears and nodded. Susan confessed what had happened and revealed where Susan had hidden Jeffrey's body, saying she didn't know what to do next. On her mother's advice, Susan contacted attorney Neil Davis the next day and confessed that Susan had killed her husband. Attorney Davis worked out a solution and thought carefully about possible scenarios. On January 19th, Neil Davis called the Harris County District Attorney's office and reported that Susan Wright had killed her husband Jeffrey and buried his body in the backyard. Susan Wright was ready to give a statement to the police. On January 24, 2003, Susan voluntarily went to the police and stated that she would give a full confession. On January 24, 2003, Susan went to the police and confessed the whole thing. However, when she was interviewed, Susan's story was unclear and full of contradictions. Susan was confused about the details and sometimes contradicted herself. Susan also claimed that Jeffrey was still alive and that she was afraid of him. As a result, Susan requested protection. As a result, Susan underwent a psychological evaluation and was diagnosed with schizophrenia and depression. However, Susan was still able to understand her actions. Following Susan's statement, the police arrived at the scene and removed Jeffrey's body from the makeshift grave in the backyard. The medical examiner was surprised to see numerous injuries on the body. The medical examiner's team counted a total of 193 stab wounds on the body. Specifically, there were 8 wounds in the groin area, about 30 wounds in the legs, 23 wounds in the shoulders and arms, 22 wounds in the abdomen, 46 wounds in the arms, 23 wounds in the neck, and 41 wounds in the face. However, only one wound to the head could be considered the direct cause of death. All other cuts were superficial and did not pose an immediate threat to life. This left Jeffrey with a long and painful death. Police saw deep marks on Jeffrey's wrists and ankles from the ropes and belt Susan used to restrain him. These injuries indicated that Jeffrey had tried to free himself but was unsuccessful. Additionally, traces of candle wax were found on Jeffrey's gun and groin area. Susan claimed that it was an accident as her husband accidentally turned a burning candle on himself, but police believe the hot wax was more likely a form of torture inflicted on Jeffrey to cause pain. Susan's underwear was still in Jeffrey's mouth, acting as a gag to prevent Jeffrey from screaming or calling for help. Toxicology reports revealed traces of alcohol and several controlled substances in Jeffrey's system, suggesting that Jeffrey may have acted aggressively under the influence of these substances. The bedroom where the massacre took place appeared normal, except for a large bleach stain on the carpet, suggesting that Susan had spent a lot of time cleaning and hiding the evidence. When experts used chemicals and special equipment to detect the blood traces that had been cleaned up, a completely different view of the project emerged. Blood was found everywhere, including on the ceiling and the red blood cell cushion. The trial began in late February 2004. By that time, Susan had been in custody for a year and her children were in the care of her parents and sister Cindy. Susan's attorney had prepared extensively for the trial and worked extensively with Susan. When questioned, Susan recounted the sad story of that terrible night and the events leading up to it. Susan said she had endured years of abuse and resistance. However, when Jeffrey began abusing the children, Susan could not take it anymore. Susan recounted that fateful evening, Jeffrey came home from the gym in a state of agitation. Jeffrey then began teaching their 5-year-old son punching and fighting techniques. When the son became scared and refused, Jeffrey punched him in the face. Susan then put the child to bed and decided to talk to Jeffrey about seeking help at a clinic for alcohol and drug abuse. However, Jeffrey became angry and decided to leave, taking the keys with him. While Susan tried to stop Jeffrey, a fight broke out between the two, leaving Susan with injuries to her palm and wrist. During the attack, Jeffrey attacked her, causing her to fall to the floor and briefly lose consciousness. When Susan regained consciousness, she found Jeffrey holding a knife in his hand. Susan could not explain how the knife ended up in her hand afterward. Susan's attorney argued that Susan's mental instability was the cause of her actions, causing Susan to lose control of her attacks until she had inflicted multiple injuries on Jeffrey. Susan said she tied the rope and belt around Jeffrey's hands after inflicting multiple injuries, then used a wheelbarrow to carry Jeffrey out into the yard. As for the scraps found, Susan claimed they came from a candle that Susan had left on her bedside table that night when she had left the nightlight on. Susan could not explain why her underwear appeared in Jeffrey's mouth. The prosecution's argument and conclusion were more convincing and reasonable. Experts demonstrated that the deep wounds and abrasions on Jeffrey's wrists and ankles were inflicted while he was still alive, indicating that the binding was part of an intimate game that Susan used to lure Jeffrey into a trap. Therefore, it was reasonable that Susan's underwear had replaced the gag in Jeffrey's mouth. Furthermore, all of the wounds were inflicted at a certain angle, as if Susan were on top of Jeffrey's body, sitting on him, rather than in the midst of a struggle, which would have resulted in a different type of injury. All of the cuts were made from the front while Jeffrey was lying on his back and firmly immobilized. The question remains whether Susan planned Jeffrey's death. The prosecution claims that Susan planned the whole thing in hopes of receiving a large insurance payout. The case was widely publicized as Susan was dubbed the Blue-Eyed Butcher or the Blonde Meat Grinder by the press. Jeffrey's relatives demanded the harshest punishment for Susan. At first, people asked for a life sentence for Susan. However, in March 2004, Susan was convicted and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Susan did not think about the judge's decision and was completely emotionless. A year later, Susan's attorneys attempted to appeal the conviction, but it was denied. With new developments and a reduced sentence in 2008, Susan and her defense team filed another appeal. This time, a new witness testimony significantly affected the outcome of the case. Misty McKell, wife of former NFL champion Steve McKell, had a close relationship with Jeffrey Wright in the mid-1990s and was even engaged to Jeffrey for a year. However, Misty McKell shared horrific experiences of being physically and mentally abused by Jeffrey, causing her to abandon plans for marriage and end the relationship permanently. After considering Misty McKell's testimony, Susan's sentence was reduced to 20 years. In 2014, when she was 38 years old, Susan was eligible for parole once but was denied. Susan was also denied a second time in July 2017. Finally, after 16 years in prison, Susan was released in the winter of 2020 when she was 44 years old. Susan Wright's case was widely covered in the media and aired on the U.S. national television network Court TV. The story was later made into several popular television documentaries, including 48 Hours Mystery and The Secret Lives of Stepford Wives. In 2012, the feature film Blue-Eyed Butcher was released, starring actress Sarah Paxton as Susan Wright. Additionally, in 2014, Canadian documentary filmmaker Chloe Ballant discovered a short film inspired by Susan Wright's trial. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Channon Starbuck. Channon was born on April 19, 1969, in Anderson, Indiana. She was the youngest child in her family and grew up with 2 older brothers. However, her life changed dramatically when her parents divorced and remarried, giving her more siblings. From a young age, Shannon dreamed of having a large and loving family of her own. She often participated in church activities and had a deep faith, which reinforced her dream. Shannon grew up in a simple and friendly environment. She had a passion for painting and won many awards. When she was 20, she met Clay Starbuck, a 25-year-old man. They met at a party in Florida, where Shannon had moved with her family when she was a child. Clay Starbuck, originally from Alaska, came to Florida during his vacation. During their first meeting, Shannon learned a lot about Clay, including that he had attended a diesel mechanic school in Colorado after high school. He then returned home to work on the Trans-Alaska Pipeline and was financially stable. However, Shannon also learned that Clay was married and had 2 children from that marriage. Despite this, she was not discouraged by his complicated past. Instead, she saw it as a positive thing, believing that it gave him valuable experience for his married life. After getting married, Shannon and Clay moved in together. In the new place, Shannon had to overcome many difficulties related to the environment and weather, but she eventually adapted and settled down. However, married life was not as perfect as Shannon had planned. Shannon and Clay were often apart because of Clay's work, but their love helped her overcome her loneliness and wait for the day they could reunite. During that time, she cared for Clay's children from his previous marriage and had more children. In 1996, the Starbucks family welcomed their son Austin, followed by his brother Blake 3 years later. When their daughter Logan was born, the family was even more excited. However, Logan was soon diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, adding to the challenges of family life. Shannon had to deal with Logan's illness and try to support her daughter. She became a more caring and nurturing mother to her children. She spent time on health care, education, and community activities. But while she focused on raising her family, she did not realize that her husband was having an affair at work. As time passed, the Starbuck family continued to grow, and Shannon welcomed another daughter, Serena. Despite the hardships of life, she still tried to keep her family happy. But her husband's secret eventually came to light, and it would change her life forever. In 2000, Shannon filed for divorce after experiencing a great shock and feeling deeply betrayed. However, she still had feelings for Clay and decided to move to Arizona to start a new life. This attempt failed because she still loved Clay. When Clay contacted her and begged her to come back, Shannon believed that he had repented and decided to give him a second chance. In 2001, Shannon and Clay welcomed their 5th child, Marshall. However, Marshall's birth created new disagreements. Even an official remarriage in 2006 could not save their broken relationship. After the remarriage, the family moved to Deer Park in Spokane County, Washington. Clay continued to work at his previous job, which led to him being away from home often. Shannon had to manage her family and children on her own. However, suspicion continued to poison their marriage, which was affected by the long separations and breakups that occurred during their relationship. Finally, in 2010, Shannon and Clay divorced for good. When she turned 40, Shannon decided to rebuild her life once again. She still hoped that she could experience the joy of love. She was also determined not to repeat the mistakes of the past. Even when Clay was seriously injured, she chose not to get back together with him. Instead, she chose to support her ex-husband and provide help when needed. In February 2011, Clay quit his job and decided to settle down permanently in Deer Park. This brought him closer to his children and also closer to Shannon. However, he still hoped that Shannon would come back to him, but Shannon did not share the same views. After finding freedom, Shannon enjoyed her new life. Austin and Blake then moved in with their father, and they were happy to be away from their mother's constant supervision. Shannon found a part-time job and enrolled in a dental assistant course after her divorce. She had to take care of her family and provide for her children, especially when her ex-husband stopped paying child support due to illness. However, she still had another man to support her in case of emergency. Her children often stayed with this man every Wednesday and on the second and fourth weekends of the month. After completing the course and receiving her certificate, Shannon was proud and began to pursue a new dream. She created a profile on a dating website, hoping to meet a man who was worthy and could help her forget her past. She still regretted spending so many years with Clay, a man who did not appreciate her. However, one morning in December 2011, her dream was suddenly ended. On December 2, 2011, the police were notified that Shannon was unreachable. Her ex-husband, Clay Starbuck, was the first to report. He reported that he had not been able to contact his ex-wife since December 1 around 3 p.m. Shannon had texted her daughter that she could not pick them up from school because she was not feeling well and asked her father to pick them up. However, his phone was turned off, so he did not know about her text. The two children, Marshall and Serena, were tired and hungry. As a result, Logan, 15, decided to call his brother and ask him to drive them to their father's house, which was a few blocks away. When they arrived, Austin said he had not been able to contact his mother either. She may have turned off her phone to rest and recover. Austin took the children to Clay's house. Clay was not expecting them but was very happy to see his children again. After the divorce, the older children lived with him, while the three youngest children lived with their mother. So the father decided to enjoy his time with his children and not bother Shannon. On December 2, Clay drove the children to school and went to Shannon's house. However, the front door was locked and the blinds were drawn. Since he did not have a spare key, he could not enter the house. Clay then sent a text message saying that if Shannon did not show up by 7 p.m., he would contact law enforcement. Time passed without Clay receiving a response from Shannon, so he went to the police and reported the situation. Two sheriffs went to the address provided but did not see anything suspicious and returned. The sheriff suggested waiting another day, and if she had not contacted him by then, he should return. Frustrated, Clay went home and waited for news. The next day, Clay went to the police station again. This time, the police told him that he was not the only one reported missing. A friend and Shannon's mother were also unable to contact her. This did not fit her personality. This time, the police took a more serious approach to the case. Many of Shannon's relatives began to worry. After receiving the necessary permission, the police returned to Shannon's house to investigate. When they arrived, the police broke the lock and entered. Initially, they saw no signs of forced entry or robbery. Everything seemed to be in its place. However, when they entered Shannon's bedroom, they discovered an unexpected detail: a broken statue. Then came the horrifying scenes. Shannon, 42, was found lying on her back on the floor of her bedroom in a provocative pose. On her stomach was an erotic massage tool. She had hoped for a better future, but fate did not give her the chance to fulfill her dream. Shannon's body was covered in bruises and scratches. The medical examiner's report showed that some of the injuries on her body were caused by a stun gun. There was also evidence that her body had been moved. Shannon's cause of death was strangulation. It was the detective's job to figure out Shannon's last hours and find the culprit. The police realized that Shannon Starbuck had not only disappeared but had also been brutally murdered. Her room looked as if it had been turned upside down. The bed was unmade, the blankets and sheets were missing, and the mattress cover was stained red. Shannon's cell phone and diary were on the dresser. Forensic experts focused on this room and examined all surfaces for fingerprints. Some surfaces had been wiped clean, but they found 12 latent fingerprints on the massager and the bathroom mirror. They also found many other traces in common areas for DNA analysis. Experts took samples from under Channon's fingernails on her face and neck. Detectives suspect that Channon was killed after she left the bathroom, then placed on the bed, and finally dragged to the floor. It is worth noting that the removed bed sheets were found in the washing machine, possibly intended to destroy evidence. The detectives needed to gather information about Channon and her lifestyle. So, after the ex-husband calmed down, they questioned him. Clay explained that he and his ex-wife had an arrangement regarding child pickup and drop-off. Every morning, he picked up the younger kids and took them to school, and she picked them up after school. Clay said that on the morning of December 1st, his car broke down a few blocks from home. So he texted Channon, asking her to take the kids to school. He then went home to wait for the car to warm up, thinking that would help it start. Around 11 a.m., he tried to restart the car but was unsuccessful. He gave up and went back inside to take a nap. During that time, his cell phone battery died. To back up his claim, he showed his correspondence with his ex-wife. At first, everything made sense. Furthermore, Clay was very cooperative, handing over his cell phone, DNA sample, and fingerprints. He also confessed that he was worried about Channon because the divorce had made her more vulnerable. In addition, he shared that because she was single, Channon had registered on a dating website and had many admirers. According to Clay, it is possible that Channon had several lovers at the same time. He believes that one of them may have caused her death. However, he could not name them specifically due to a lack of information. During the conversation, Clay sobbed. He explained that accepting the death of his ex-lover was very difficult. After taking his statement, the police let Clay go home. He was faced with informing his children about Channon's death. The case involving Channon Starbuck's death has attracted public attention. Investigators interviewed the Starbucks neighbors, focusing on details, especially reports of strange people and vehicles appearing outside her home in recent weeks. An autopsy was performed, and the report found that Starbucks suffered chest injuries consistent with the use of a stun gun. She also suffered 10 broken ribs. The injuries to her head and body were severe and likely caused by a blunt object. Because of the appearance of the injuries, it was difficult to determine the exact time of death. Scratch marks on her body indicated that she had been moved after she was killed. The medical examiner's report indicated that a soft object was used to strangle her, possibly a hand, a towel, or a sheet. A key clue in the case came from the body samples collected, including the DNA of a man, suggesting that the suspect may have been a close acquaintance of hers. Channon's family hopes the police will quickly find the culprit. Channon's ex-husband, Clay Starbuck, has cooperated fully with the investigation. He underwent a physical examination to look for any signs of injury on his body, but none were found. As detectives speculated that the culprit may have been injured during the struggle, there was no evidence of that. Channon's two sons, Austin, 21, and Blake, 18, were also examined. Austin had old cuts on his hands, but he explained that these cuts were from his job at a window factory. In conversations with the two brothers, detectives established some important facts. They learned that their mother often dated men after the divorce, which made them unhappy. The brothers also said they had seen intimate photos on their mother's laptop, which led them to suspect that their mother may have been murdered by a lover. However, it was clear that they both loved their mother and were deeply saddened by her passing. Nonetheless, they did not agree with the changes in her life. In a later interview, Clay was more specific. He said Channon caused discord in the family when he was away on business. She often met other men, and he even suspected that Marshall might not be his son. However, he still loved Marshall like his own son. He did not agree with some of Channon's actions, especially the fact that she often brought the children to his house when she went on dates. However, Investigators gained a personal view of Channon and her family after speaking with him, her children, and her relatives and friends. After the investigation, detectives had a complete picture of Channon in her life. The kindness and concern of those who attended Channon's funeral on December 10, 2011, showed that she was an intelligent and sincere person. She was buried in a cemetery in Orlando. Investigators quickly searched for the killer after the incident attracted public attention. The suspect at that time was her ex-husband, Clay Starbuck. Police needed to verify his alibi to eliminate him as a suspect. When the first fingerprint results came back, detectives discovered that the fingerprints did not match any at the scene. Therefore, the police needed to gather more information about Clay Starbuck. They also took samples from his cell phone, laptop, and personal diary. At the same time, they also considered the possibility that other people were involved in the murder. After a thorough examination of Starbuck's cell phone, detectives added several names to the suspect list. One of them was someone Channon had connected with through a dating site. They discovered that a man named Tom Walker had scheduled a date with Channon on December 5th, a few hours before her death. They also discovered that Tom and Channon had been chatting openly and exchanging photos. Tom had asked Channon to pose for a photo with an adult toy, but she refused. Interestingly, Channon's body was later found in the exact pose Tom had mentioned. Tom was found within an hour and immediately became a suspect. He explained his activities on the day of Channon's death, which was confirmed by coworkers and surveillance cameras. John Wilson then scheduled a date with Channon on December 1st. It was clear from their correspondence that he was not looking for a serious relationship. However, the truth is that John Wilson used a fake name. His real name is John Kinlawn, who works in a completely different field and is married, so he had to keep it a secret. On the day of the incident, John Kinlawn postponed his morning meeting with Channon until later, citing a headache. In the end, the appointment did not take place. After his DNA sample was taken, he was released. His alibi was confirmed, even though his deception was revealed to his family. The investigation continued, and investigators uncovered some important evidence. When they searched Channon's phone, they asked the carrier for more information and discovered something significant. At 9:18 a.m. on December 1st, a 911 call was made from Channon's phone, but someone had deleted it from the call history. Thanks to a request from emergency services, investigators were able to retrieve the call. However, the call contained only crying and other noises before it was abruptly cut off. Investigators also discovered that after the initial call was unsuccessful, emergency services attempted to call back, but the call went to voicemail. GPS data from Channon's cell phone pinpointed her location at home on the day of her death. Notably, these events occurred after she dropped her children off at school and returned home. Therefore, the messages sent a few hours later could not have been from her. The perpetrator was trying to confuse the investigation. Additionally, this person had a close relationship with the Starbuck family. For example, he used a nickname for their youngest son in his correspondence. Upon closer examination of the information, Clay's statements became even more suspicious. He had a motive to end his ex-wife's life because he could not accept the reality of the divorce. Moreover, he had the perfect opportunity to do this because he knew her daily routine. To clarify the suspicion, the authorities decided to track Clay's car route again, this time using street surveillance camera recordings. The results showed that Clay's car was not broken down as he had claimed. Simultaneously, the results of a second DNA analysis from Channon's body matched exactly with Clay's sample. On the morning of December 1st, Clay sent a text message to his ex-wife, asking her to take the kids to school and saying that his car had broken down. While she was away, he entered her home and waited. During this time, He accessed her laptop and found personal correspondence that made him jealous and angry. When Channon returned home, a heated argument ensued that ended in violence. This explains why she was found in an unusual position. This may have been an act of revenge for her newly gained freedom. Clay then stayed at the house and impersonated Channon in text messages. It seems that he had long intended to harm his ex-wife. The words of a friend of Channon's took on new meaning for detectives. In one conversation, the friend mentioned that Clay and Channon's relationship was not normal. Channon confessed that she was fed up with Clay's constant control and criticism. She was afraid of divorce because she feared that he might one day hurt her. Between June and November 2011, Channon contacted the police several times, accusing her ex-husband of stalking her. She felt unsafe even in her own home and therefore did not trust anyone with a key. She eventually managed to obtain a restraining order against Clay, so their communication was limited to text messages. A careful examination of Channon's diary makes it clear that she was not only afraid of her ex-husband but also believed that he was turning the children against her. Clay fabricated lewd stories and portrayed her as promiscuous. The children's reaction to their father's arrest on February 6, 2012, is therefore not surprising. They refused to believe his involvement. The children were unfazed by the fact that a tracking program was found on Channon's laptop and a hard drive labeled Channon's desktop was found in Clay's home, along with printed correspondence. The older children doubted the authenticity of the DNA analysis, believing that the accusations against their father were unfounded and that the case was fabricated. However, the views of law enforcement and other relatives were different. The prosecution was convinced of Clay's guilt, relying on a large amount of physical and testimonial evidence. In June 2013, justice prevailed, and Clay Starbuck was convicted of first-degree murder with aggravating circumstances and disrespect for human remains. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In 2015, Clay's attorney filed an appeal of the sentence, but it was denied. To this day, Clay remains behind bars at the Airway Heights Correctional Facility in Spokane County. Channon's loved ones mourn her sudden passing, but their hearts are even more broken by the thought that her children sided with their father. He was so obsessed with his ex-wife that, in his quest for revenge, he forgot the consequences, leaving his children orphaned.